Hey there, tonight we're exploring how empires like Rome and Egypt marked the end of a year. What you're about to discover is that their celebrations were as much about politics and power as they were about time. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Ever tried keeping track of time without a smartphone, a wall calendar, or even a wristwatch? Well, if you think missing a meeting because your phone battery died is bad, try navigating the chaos of ancient calendars. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded, with a different definition of blue every week. Welcome to the world of Roman and Egyptian timekeeping, a realm where the end of the year wasn't just a date, but a full-blown logistical challenge wrapped in religious fervor and agricultural necessity. Let's dive into the Romans first, those toga-wearing maestros of military conquest who just couldn't get their calendar to make sense. The calendar was like spaghetti thrown at a wall. It stuck however it liked. Originally, the Roman calendar had 10 months. Yes, 10. Count them: Mardius, Aprilis, Maius, Iunius, Quintilis, Sextilis, September, October, November, December. If you're thinking, wait, that's only 304 days, you're right. The Romans, it seems, were on a part-time year plan. The year started with March, because who doesn't want to kick things off with a good war season? This was followed by Aprilis, and so on, until December. Then came a vague period of winter that nobody bothered to fit into the calendar. It was like they collectively decided, let's just wing it until spring. Enter January and February, 2 months Julius Caesar introduced to bring some order to the chaos. By 46 BC, he'd had enough of the whole winter free-for-all, so he implemented the Julian calendar, borrowing heavily from the Egyptian solar model. Now, the year had 365 days, with a leap day every 4 years. The man was essentially the Steve Jobs of ancient timekeeping, revolutionizing how Romans marked time's passage. But even this system wasn't perfect. It was like patching a sinking ship with duct tape. It worked better than no tape at all, but it still left room for plenty of surprises. In contrast, the Egyptians had their own brand of calendrical confusion. Their system was based on the lunisolar cycle, which sounds like a trendy yoga move, but was actually a calendar that combined both lunar and solar years. The Egyptians were meticulous about aligning their calendar with the Nile's flooding, which was as critical to their agriculture as Wi-Fi is to modern office workers. Their year was divided into 3 seasons: Akit, flooding; Peret, growth; and Shemu, harvest, each of which had 4 months. Each month had 3 weeks, and each week had 10 days. If you're keeping count, that adds up to 360 days. But wait, there's more. To bridge the gap between their 360-day calendar and the solar year, they tacked on 5 extra days at the end, days that were considered outside the regular calendar. These were dedicated to the birthdays of some of their most important gods, like Osiris and Isis. Imagine squeezing a week's worth of birthday parties into 5 days. It's like a fraternity rush week, but with more pyramids and fewer kegs. These systems weren't just about marking time. They were deeply intertwined with the empire's economies and agricultural cycles. For the Romans, whose empire spanned from the rainy British Isles to the sun-scorched sands of Egypt, the calendar was critical for organizing everything from military campaigns to tax collection. It was a tool of power, a way to impose order on an empire as vast as their ambition. The Egyptians, meanwhile, relied on their calendar to predict the annual flooding of the Nile, a life-giving inundation that brought fertile soil to the parched lands. Without this calendar, farming would have been less of a science and more of a gamble, with every year a potential bust. Their calendar was a reflection of their reliance on the natural world, a constant reminder of the delicate balance between human endeavor and the whims of the river gods. And let's not forget the awkwardness of leap months, a concept so baffling it makes the leap year look like child's play. The Romans occasionally inserted an entire extra month, Mercedonius, to realign the calendar with the seasons. This was down to the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest, who could decide when to add this month. Talk about job perks. Imagine having the power to make February disappear entirely and replace it with a month-long holiday. But this system was ripe for abuse, as politicians could manipulate the calendar to extend their terms in office or shorten those of rivals. It's like if Congress could vote to skip an election year by adding a month named Politicus Favorabilia. In essence, these ancient calendars were both a mirror and a hammer, reflecting the empire's reliance on agriculture and their attempts to impose order on the chaos of the natural world. They were a testament to human ingenuity and a reminder of our perpetual struggle to make sense of the cosmos. As much as we like to think of ourselves as masters of time, history shows us that time has always been a slippery beast, one that requires constant taming and occasional bribery in the form of leap months and extra godly birthday parties. While today we might laugh at these ancient attempts to mark the end of the year, they were serious business back then. The calendar wasn't just a tool, it was a statement of power, a declaration of order amidst the chaos. It was the ultimate flex, a way to say, we have conquered time itself. And perhaps, in a way, they did. They took the swirling, chaotic universe and pinned it down, at least for a while, with the sharpness of their quills and the weight of their empires. So, next time you check your calendar app, spare a thought for the Romans and Egyptians, who laid the groundwork for our modern understanding of time, one awkward leap month at a time. As we leave behind the calendar capers of the Romans and Egyptians, let's fast forward in our time machine to the medieval era, a time when the Byzantine and Holy Roman empires were busy making their own mark on the concept of New Year festivities. Spoiler alert, it was less about popping champagne and more about political chess and economic calculations. Because when you're an empire, every day is a battle for power, and the calendar is just one more weapon in your imperial arsenal. First up, the Byzantine Empire, which thrived from roughly 330 to 1453 AD. They were the proud heirs of Roman traditions, including their knack for complex calendar gymnastics. The Byzantines were like the Romans' overachieving younger sibling. Everything had to be bigger, better, and more Byzantine. Their new year officially began on September 1st, a choice that seems odd if you're used to starting the year with a hangover on January 1st. But there's a method to this madness. September 1st wasn't just a random date plucked from the ether, it was tied to the Byzantine fiscal year. Yes, even back then, New Year was all about the Benjamins, or rather, the gold solidi. Byzantine emperors knew that aligning the start of the year with the fiscal calendar was a power move, a way to consolidate control over tax collection and state expenditures. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of balancing the books, only with fewer spreadsheets and more scrolls. It's a reminder that while the Byzantines might have been gazing at icons and mosaics, their feet were firmly planted in the gritty realities of economic management. Meanwhile, over in Central Europe, the Holy Roman Empire was having its own calendar conundrums. Founded in 800 AD by Charlemagne, yes, that Charlemagne, the one who's often depicted as a warrior king straight of a medieval superhero movie, the Holy Roman Empire had a love-hate relationship with the calendar. While the empire was sprawling across modern-day Germany, France, and Italy, its leaders were busy wrestling with timekeeping. Now, if you think office politics today are rough, imagine trying to run an empire where the calendar could change at the whim of whichever emperor, pope, or bishop had the most influence. The Holy Roman Empire's New Year date was a moving target, sometimes celebrated on Christmas Day, sometimes on March 25, the Feast of the Annunciation, or even on Easter, depending on who was calling the shots. It's like if New Year's Eve was scheduled by committee, with everyone insisting their birthday party should take precedence. This calendar chaos wasn't just for show, it was a strategic play. By shifting the New Year date, rulers could align their reigns with significant religious events, reinforcing their divine right to rule. The medieval mindset was all about the divine mandate, and nothing said, "I'm God's chosen one," like starting the year with a religious bang. But behind the pious facade was a shrewd calculation. Aligning your reign with the church calendar meant more control over ecclesiastical lands and revenues. And speaking of revenues, let's not romanticize the notion that medieval New Year celebrations were all about feasting and merrymaking. Sure, there were celebrations, but they were often the preserve of the elite. For the average serf, New Year's Day was more likely to be just another day of toil in the fields. Under the feudal system, peasants were bound to the land and subject to the whims of their lords, whose power was as entrenched as the mud under the serf's feet. The reality of medieval life was harsh, with high mortality rates, frequent famines, and the ever-present threat of violence. It's a far cry from the sanitized version of the Middle Ages often portrayed in movies and theme parks. But let's not be too cynical. The myths and legends about grandiose celebrations did serve a purpose. They were a form of propaganda, a way for rulers to project power and unity to their subjects. By staging elaborate feasts and ceremonies, the ruling class reinforced the idea of a divinely ordained hierarchy. It was as much about spectacle as it was about substance, a medieval PR campaign designed to keep the masses in line. In the Byzantine and Holy Roman Empires, the end of the year wasn't just a date on a calendar. It was a culmination of power plays, economic necessity, and religious significance. These empires knew that controlling time meant controlling the narrative, and by extension, the people. The calendar was a canvas on which emperors painted their authority, ensuring that their rule was as timeless as the stones of Constantinople or Aachen. Yet, for all their differences, the Byzantine and Holy Roman empires shared a common thread. The understanding that time is both a tool and a weapon. It can be shaped, manipulated, and wielded to serve those in power. And as we'll see in the next part of our historical journey, these medieval maneuvers were just the beginning. The story of how empires mark the end of a year is far from over, with more twists, turns, and calendar quirks yet to come. So hold onto your hourglasses, because our odyssey through time is only just warming up. But wait, just as we're getting comfortable in the medieval groove, along comes the Renaissance to kick the calendar into a whole new dimension. Picture Europe, a cultural cauldron bubbling with new ideas, where art flourishes and science begins to challenge long-held beliefs. It's as if everyone woke up and realized they'd been playing Monopoly with the wrong set of rules. Enter the astronomers and mathematicians, ready to shake things up. The Renaissance wasn't just about painting cherubs or sculpting marble Davids. It was a time when people looked to the heavens and thought, hey, maybe we should double-check those old star charts. Science was beginning to pick up speed, and with it, the realization that the Julian calendar, Julius Caesar's legacy, was about as accurate as a broken sundial in the shade. It overestimated the solar year by 11 minutes and 14 seconds. Doesn't sound like much, does it? But over centuries, those minutes had snowballed into a 10-day discrepancy between the calendar and the actual equinoxes. Imagine planning your harvest when your calendar's as reliable as a weather forecast on April Fool's Day. Cue Pope Gregory Roman XIII, the man with a plan, or rather, a reform. In 1582, he decided it was high time to sort out this temporal mess. Gregory didn't just tweak the system. He hit the reset button with a sledgehammer, introducing the Gregorian calendar. And how did he fix centuries of calendrical drift? By declaring that the day after October 4, 1582, would be October 15, 1582. 10 days, poof, just gone. Imagine waking up to find out you've lost a week and a half without even a good party to blame. But this wasn't just about correcting the calendar for the sake of astronomy. Oh no, it was about power, politics, and cold, hard cash. The Gregorian reform had significant economic implications. European trade, which was booming by the time, needed a standard system to avoid chaos akin to showing up for a business meeting a week late because your calendar's doing its own thing. And speaking of trade, let's talk money. The fiscal implications of missing days weren't trivial. Merchants and bankers needed consistency to calculate interest, dues, and pay taxes accurately. When you're dealing with guilds and merchants whose livelihoods depend on precise timing, a 10-day skip could mean the difference between profit and loss. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with Gregory's reform. Protestant nations viewed the new calendar with suspicion, seeing it as a papal plot to undermine their autonomy. It was as if the Pope had tried to sell them a car with the odometer rolled back. England, for instance, held out until 1752 before adopting the Gregorian calendar, by which time their Julian calendar was off by 11 days. And when they finally made the switch, riots broke out with people demanding, "Give us our 11 days." It seems the English weren't keen on losing nearly 2 weeks of rent-free living. Despite the drama, the Gregorian calendar caught on, and for good reason. It was more accurate, aligning the calendar year with the solar year far more closely. By ditching 3 leap years every 400 years, it managed to keep time with the Earth's revolutions around the sun. It was a triumph of scientific reasoning over tradition, a harbinger of the Enlightenment's rationality. Now, while we're basking in the glow of scientific progress, let's not gloss over the fact that this shift wasn't just about aligning with the cosmos. It was also about asserting control over time itself. The church and state wielded the calendar as a tool of power, showing that they, not nature, were the arbiters of time. It was a declaration that humanity had the intellect and authority to impose order on chaos. But this wasn't just a top-down decree. It was a reflection of broader cultural shifts. As Europe moved toward modernity, the need for a standardized, reliable calendar became increasingly pressing. The transition to the Gregorian calendar wasn't just a neat correction of celestial miscalculations. It was a statement of faith in human intellect and authority. It demonstrated that, despite the celestial ballet of stars and planets, humanity was beginning to understand its rhythms and harness them for its own ends. This was no small feat, a testament to the growing power of science and reason. And as Europe stepped into the Age of Enlightenment, the calendar wasn't just a tool for keeping track of days. It was a symbol of mankind's expanding horizon and ambition. But before we get too swept away in the romance of it all, let's take a step back and remember the economic reality. Every change had winners and losers, and the Gregorian calendar was no exception. For traders and governments, it meant recalibrating everything from tax cycles to shipping schedules. Imagine trying to untangle centuries of trade deals, debts, and contracts when the very foundation of timekeeping shifts beneath your feet. It was as if the world was learning to dance to a new beat, and some were more rhythmically inclined than others. As we transition from the Renaissance into the Enlightenment, the calendar continued to evolve, reflecting humanity's growing understanding of the universe and its place within it. The adoption of the Gregorian calendar was a turning point, marking the moment when science began to challenge old systems and propose new, more accurate ones. It was a harbinger of the Enlightenment, where reason and empirical evidence would take center stage, reshaping not just calendars, but the very fabric of society. As we prepare to dive into the intricacies of Enlightenment thought and its impact on timekeeping, let's keep in mind that, while calendars are tools for marking the passage of time, they're also mirrors of the societies that create them. They reflect our ambitions, our beliefs, and our attempts to impose order on the chaos of existence. The story of how empires mark the end of a year is far from over, and as we continue our journey, we'll uncover the next chapter of this complex, captivating tale. So stay tuned, because the clock is still ticking, and history waits for no one. As we continue our exploration of the clock-wrangling antics of history, let's sail into the high seas of colonial empires, where timekeeping was as much about control as it was about marking the end of a year. The British and Spanish empires weren't just in the business of collecting exotic spices and precious metals. They were also hell-bent on exporting their calendars to every corner of the globe. And why not? When you're controlling 3/4 of a planet's surface, you might as well make sure everyone else is on your time. Let's start with the British, the stiff upper-lipped masters of maritime dominance. By the late 19th century, British Empire had its well-polished boots on nearly a fifth of the world's landmass. But what's an empire without a synchronized clock? Picture this. The sun never sets on the British Empire, but with local time zones, coordinating a simple conference call would be enough to drive a Victorian gentleman to madness, or tea. So, in 1884, at the International Meridian Conference, the Brits planted their flag at Greenwich, declaring it the prime meridian. From that moment, time itself was sliced into neat, manageable segments, like an empire-approved pie chart. Now, this wasn't just about convenience. Nope, it was a power play, pure and simple. By stamping Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, onto the world, Britain wasn't just organizing trains and telegraphs. It was declaring who called the shots. It was as if Big Ben's chimes were echoing across the globe, reminding everyone who was boss. But the transition wasn't all tick-tock smooth. Local populations, from India to Africa, had their own ways of marking time, often tied to nature and agriculture. Forcing GMT on these societies was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, awkward and, frankly, a bit imperialistic. Across the pond, the Spanish took a similar approach, albeit with a different flavor. When they landed in the Americas, They brought not just Catholicism and smallpox, but also the Julian calendar, later switching to the Gregorian to keep up with papal mandates. The Spanish colonial administration enforced this European calendar to regulate everything from religious festivals to tax collection. In the Viceroyalty of Peru and New Spain, modern-day Mexico, the calendar became a tool of control, dictating when indigenous peoples could harvest crops or hold traditional ceremonies. But here's the kicker. The Spanish calendar imposition wasn't just about religious conformity. It was about squeezing every last bit of economic value from their colonies. By aligning the local economy with the European calendar, the Spanish could better manage the shipment of resources like silver and gold back to the motherland. Imagine trying to run a transatlantic bullion pipeline without a synchronized calendar. It'd be like herding cats, except the cats are made of precious metals, and the herd is 3,000 miles wide. Yet, the imposition of European timekeeping wasn't all about practical efficiency. It also carried a hefty dose of cultural arrogance. The narrative of the civilizing mission painted Europeans as benevolent timekeepers, generously bestowing order on the chaotic, timeless societies of the New World. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't some altruistic crusade. It was economic exploitation wrapped in a cloak of civilization. The Spanish crown wasn't interested in making the world a better place. It was interested in making it a richer place, specifically for Spain. A case in point, the Potosi silver mines in modern-day Bolivia, where indigenous laborers were forced to work under brutal conditions to extract wealth that would fund Spain's imperial ambitions. Here, the calendar was more than just a tool for scheduling fiestas. It was a mechanism of oppression, dictating labor cycles and ensuring the steady flow of silver to European coffers. The so-called civilizing calendar was just another cog in the vast machinery of colonial exploitation. And what about those bizarre local adaptations? Well, colonial subjects were nothing if not resourceful. In India, for instance, the British calendar was overlaid onto existing Hindu and Islamic systems, creating a kind of temporal patchwork quilt. Festivals might be celebrated according to the lunar calendar, while taxes were due according to the solar one, leading to a dizzying dance of dates that would make any accountant's head spin. This blend of timekeeping traditions wasn't just confusion. It was a testament to the resilience of local cultures in the face of imperial imposition. Similarly, in the Philippines under Spanish rule, the Gregorian calendar was adopted, but local customs and festivals persisted, often resulting in a hybrid system that was uniquely Filipino. Here, the calendar wasn't just a tool for marking the passage of time. It was a canvas on which the cultural interplay of colonizer and colonized was vividly painted. So, what's the takeaway from this calendrical colonization? It's a reminder that history, like time, is never as straightforward as it seems. The romanticized narratives of civilizing missions gloss over the harsh realities of economic exploitation and cultural imperialism. Sure, the British and Spanish brought their calendars to the world, but they also brought a whole lot of chaos, coercion, and cultural upheaval. And while the clocks may have ticked in unison, the lived experience of colonial subjects was anything but synchronized. As we look back at how empires marked the end of a year, it's clear that timekeeping was more than just an administrative tool. It was a statement of power, a way to impose order on chaos, and a method of extraction and control. The calendar was as much about domination as it was about dates. And as we continue our historical journey, we'll see that the story of timekeeping is far from over. With every tick of the clock, history unfolds, revealing new chapters in the intricate dance between power, culture, and the inexorable march of time. So stick around, because we're just getting started, and the next tick promises to be just as enlightening as the last. As our historical odyssey sails into the modern era, we find ourselves in a world where the echoes of imperial timekeeping still resonate. Empires have long since crumbled, but their legacy lingers like an old tune stuck in your head, insistent, familiar, and occasionally out of tune with the present. The Gregorian calendar, that brainchild of Pope Gregory Roman XIII, has stamped its authority across the globe. But while we've settled into its rhythm, the world's diverse cultures have refused to let go of their own rich traditions. Take, for instance, the modern New Year's Eve celebrations. With the Gregorian calendar's dominance, January 1st reigns supreme as the official start of the year in much of the world. It's a time when champagne corks fly faster than New Year's resolutions are broken. Yet, despite this seeming homogeneity, countless cultures mark the passage of time with their own unique flair. In China, the Lunar New Year, determined by the cycles of the moon, is celebrated with firecrackers, dragons, and enough red decorations to make Cupid jealous. It's a reminder that while the Gregorian calendar might dictate the workweek, cultural calendars often govern the heart. The economic implications of this calendrical duality are nothing short of fascinating. In 2022, the Chinese Lunar New Year alone saw consumer spending exceeding $136 billion as families splurged on gifts, travel, and feasts. It's a testament to the enduring power of cultural traditions to drive modern economic phenomena. Similarly, in India, Diwali, often referred to as the Festival of Lights, aligns with the Hindu lunisolar calendar, marking the start of a new financial year for many businesses. The festival generates billions in sales, showcasing how cultural calendars continue to have a tangible impact on global economies. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of these celebrations. The standardization of the Gregorian calendar came with its own set of challenges. The colonial imposition of this calendar often erased indigenous systems of timekeeping, which were intricately linked to local cycles of agriculture, weather, and spirituality. In Australia, for instance, Aboriginal communities had used complex seasonal calendars for thousands of years, a practice disrupted by European settlement. These calendars weren't just about agriculture. They embodied a deep relationship with the land and environment, something that the Gregorian system, with its rigid months and leap years, could never fully capture. Yet, in our hyper-connected, globalized world, the Gregorian calendar rules the roost. Its predictability is a boon for international trade, travel, and communication, providing a common framework within which the world can operate seamlessly. But this isn't just about convenience. It's about power dynamics, too. The calendar we use can reflect who holds sway in the world. The adoption of Greenwich Mean Time and later Coordinated Universal Time, UTC, underscores the lasting influence of Western powers in shaping global norms. It's like the universe's most elaborate game of my way or the highway, where time itself is the battleground. So, what does this all mean for how we understand time today? Well, the story of empires and their calendars reveals a fundamental truth. Timekeeping is as much about control as it is about measurement. Historically, those who controlled the calendar wielded considerable power, shaping economies, religious practices, and social norms. Even today, the calendar is a tool of governance, as seen in the debates over daylight saving time, a relic of World War I energy-saving measures that continues to spark controversy and confusion. But here's the kicker. Even as we adhere to the Gregorian calendar, the world remains a tapestry of diverse timekeeping traditions. The Islamic calendar, the Hebrew calendar, and countless others continue to mark important religious and cultural events, reminding us that time is not a one-size-fits-all concept. These calendars provide a counterpoint to the globalized uniformity of the Gregorian system, offering a sense of identity and continuity amid the relentless march of modernity. As we wrap up this historical exploration, let's consider the legacy of those ancient empires. Their calendars were more than just systems of timekeeping. They were instruments of power, expressions of culture, and reflections of human ingenuity. They remind us that while we may strive for order and predictability, time remains an elusive force, one that we can attempt to tame, but never fully control. The story of how empires mark the end of a year is a testament to our enduring fascination with time, a reminder of our desire to impose meaning on the chaos of existence. In the end, the calendar is both a mirror and a window, a reflection of the societies that create it, and a glimpse into the hopes, fears, and aspirations that drive them. So, as we count down the days to the next new year, let's raise a toast to the Romans and Egyptians, the Byzantines and Ottomans, the British and Spanish, and all those who have wrestled with the slippery beast that is time. Because while the clock may keep ticking, it's the stories we tell that truly mark the passage of time. And so, dear listener, as you drift off to sleep, remember that history is always with us, echoing through the ages, one tick at a time. In the summer of 30 BCE, Augustus, the first Roman emperor, marched into Egypt like a well-dressed conqueror who was about to make the world his oyster, or at least his breadbasket. You see, Egypt was the crown jewel of the ancient world, a place of pyramids and pharaohs, but Augustus had bigger plans. He didn't just want to gawk at the Sphinx. He wanted to turn this land of sand and stone into the granary of the Roman Empire. The grain from Egypt would feed Rome's ever-hungry mouths, because nothing says imperial power like ensuring your citizens aren't hangry. Now, Augustus wasn't just a dude crashing a party. He was taking over, and with him came a buffet of economic and political changes. Under Roman rule, Egypt became the agricultural powerhouse that helped fuel an empire stretching from Britain to the Middle East. The fertile Nile Delta, with its predictable flooding and rich silt, was now Roman property, and the productivity of Egyptian soil was legendary. The breadbasket was open for business, and business was good, at least for Rome. But while Augustus was busy marveling at his new acquisition, the people of Egypt weren't exactly popping champagne, or whatever the ancient equivalent was, to celebrate. Roman rule came with a heavy price tag. Taxes skyrocketed faster than you could say Caesar salad. We're talking about tax rates that would make even a modern-day accountant wince. The average Egyptian farmer probably felt like they were working for Rome just as much as they were for themselves. This was not just a gentle nudge towards productivity, it was a full-on shove. The Romans, clever as they were, knew the value of a good PR campaign. They didn't just storm in, take over, and start collecting taxes. They also made sure to sprinkle in some cultural influence. Now, don't get it twisted. This wasn't exactly the Hallmark Christmas special. There were no twinkling lights or jolly old elves. Christmas, as we know, it was centuries away from being a snowflake in anyone's eye. But Rome had its own way of celebrating, and these cultural exchanges were part of the deal. The Romans introduced festivals that had a certain celebratory flair that would later influence Christian festivities, including Christmas. Saturnalia, for example, was a boisterous Roman festival celebrated in December, featuring feasting, gift-giving, and a temporary suspension of social norms. Think of it as the world's first office holiday party, minus the hangover remedies. In Egypt, under the watchful eyes of their new Roman overlords, these influences began to trickle down. The locals might not have been decking the halls, but they were certainly aware of the changes around them. The Roman presence wasn't just about grain and taxes. It was about a cultural shift that would echo through the centuries. So, while Augustus was busy transforming Egypt into an economic engine, the seeds of what would eventually become Christmas were being sown in the cultural soil. This wasn't the magical winter wonderland we think of today. Instead, it was a time of political maneuvering and economic exploitation, with a dash of festive influence thrown in for good measure. Augustus's conquest set the stage for a new world order, one where history was being rewritten with each passing day. And as the Nile continued its eternal flow, carrying with it the hopes and labors of countless Egyptians, the world was already changing. The Roman Empire had its grip on Egypt, and with it came the promise and the burden of a new era. It was an era where the myth of prosperity clashed with the reality of heavy burdens, and where the idea of Christmas was still just a glimmer on the distant horizon. As the Nile carried on with its age-old routine of flooding and receding, the religious landscape of ancient Egypt was about as calm as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. With Augustus's takeover, Egypt became a melting pot of spiritual beliefs, a religious buffet that merged the timeless allure of Egyptian gods with the pomp and circumstance of Roman deities. The result, a vibrant tapestry of faiths, each vying for attention like street performers at a Roman market. Now, Egyptians were no strangers to divine multitasking. They had a pantheon that rivaled a celebrity guest list, with Ra, Isis, and Osiris among the headliners. When the Romans waltzed in with their gods, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, they didn't exactly send out eviction notices to the locals' deities. Instead, they opted for a more diplomatic approach, a cultural fusion reminiscent of a religious mashup album. Roman gods were often equated with Egyptian ones, creating a divine remix that would make even the most seasoned DJ nod in appreciation. And then, as if this spiritual smorgasbord wasn't colorful enough, along came Christianity. It tiptoed into Egypt like an uninvited guest at a dinner party, its presence initially subtle yet intriguing. Early Christianity was seen as a peculiar offshoot of Judaism, and thanks to the Pax Romana, Rome's version of a no-fighting in the sandbox policy, it found fertile ground to spread its message. The empire's network of roads and trade routes acted like ancient highways, carrying not just silk and spices, but also ideas. But let's not get all dreamy-eyed about the early days of Christianity in Egypt. It wasn't all hymns and hallelujahs. The established religious order watched this new sect with the same suspicion you'd reserve for a snake oil salesman. The mix of Egyptian and Roman religious elements was already complex enough, and adding Christianity into the mix was like throwing a wild card into an already complicated game of cards. Initially, Christianity was a fringe movement, gathering followers who were probably considered a bit odd by their neighbors. Picture this: a group of people worshipping a man who was crucified as a criminal, claiming he was the Son of God. To the average Egyptian, this was about as believable as a politician's promise. Yet the message of Christianity, salvation and eternal life, had an appeal that resonated with the downtrodden and oppressed, especially in a land where Roman tax collectors were as relentless as a summer sun. Reception of Christianity was as varied as the Egyptian landscape itself. In some quarters, it was seen as a breath of fresh air, a counter-narrative to the heavily ritualistic practices of established religions. In others, it was met with hostility, perceived as a threat to the stability and order of the status quo. The early Christians faced persecution not just because of their beliefs, but because they dared to challenge the social norms that had been in place for centuries. Yet, despite the odds, Christianity continued to spread, much like the inexorable flow of the Nile. By the end of the 3rd century, it was no longer just a curious sect. It had taken root, and its followers were growing in number and influence. The story of Christianity in Egypt is one of resilience and adaptability, a testament to the power of faith in the face of adversity. In this culturally and spiritually charged environment, the seeds of future holidays were being planted. The traditions that would eventually become Christmas were still far off, but the blend of Roman festivity and Christian doctrine was slowly brewing a new way of celebrating, one that would eventually add another layer to Egypt's already rich religious tapestry. So, as the Romans continued to enjoy their Saturnalia with all its feasting and merrymaking, a new kind of celebration was beginning to take shape. It was the quiet revolution of a faith that would go on to change the world, one believer at a time. But let's not rush to conclusions just yet. We're still in the early chapters of a story that's as intricate and layered as the hieroglyphs on a temple wall, with more twists and turns to come. In the midst of Rome's celebratory Saturnalia, with its boisterous feasting and gift-giving, the daily grind in Roman Egypt continued with little fanfare. December was less about decking halls and more about checking off the to-do list of agricultural survival. Forget festive cheer. The ancient Egyptians were on a different calendar entirely, one dictated by the mighty Nile. Now, the Nile wasn't just a river, it was the lifeline of Egypt, the original influencer. This colossal flow of water was like an ancient clockwork, setting the rhythm for Egyptian life. It flooded annually, depositing nutrient-rich silt over the fields, and it was this very cycle that fueled Egypt's agricultural prowess. Picture the scene. Farmers anxiously watching the rivers rise, knowing their entire year's prosperity, or misery, depended on its whims. If the Nile was generous, they'd have bumper crops. If stingy, they'd be facing a famine faster than you can say, grain shortage. By December, the floodwaters had receded, leaving behind fertile earth ready for ploughing and sowing. It was all hands on deck to plant the wheat and barley that would eventually fill the granaries, or Augustus's purse, to be more precise. Forget snow angels and sleigh rides. Here, practical concerns of grain storage and tax deadlines loomed large. The Roman administration, never one to miss a revenue opportunity, imposed taxes that weren't just high, they were skyscraper high. And they were due, conveniently, just as farmers were scrambling to ensure the next harvest was as bountiful as possible. It was a classic case of 'tis the season to be taxed. Egyptians were adept at squeezing every drop of productivity from their land, a necessity given the Romans' unyielding demands. The grain harvest wasn't just vital, it was everything. It was their currency, their livelihood, and their contribution to the Roman Empire's insatiable appetite. The stakes were as high as a pyramid, and nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of the tax collector, who, let's face it, was about as welcome as a scorpion under your bed. As for the social calendar, there was no time for idle merriment. December was a period of preparation and anticipation, but not of the holiday kind. It was about gearing up for the hard months ahead, ensuring enough food and resources were stored to last through until the next cycle of the Nile. This was survival, plain and simple. The idea of a holiday was as foreign as a snowman in the Sahara. To add to the pressure, Egyptian farmers had to deal with the ever-watchful Roman overseers, who were keen to ensure that every grain was accounted for. These bureaucrats were meticulous to a fault, their records as detailed as any modern-day spreadsheet. Forget a casual shrug and a better luck next year attitude. These guys were the original bean counters, except their beans were bushels of grain. Meanwhile, daily life of an average Egyptian was a far cry from the splendor often associated with the land of the pharaohs. Most people lived in modest homes, their lives a testament to the art of making do. Yet, despite the grind, there was a rich tapestry of community life, with people gathering for local markets, religious observances, and social events that provided a welcome respite from the demands of the fields. And while the Romans were busy indulging in Saturnalia's revelry, the Egyptians had their own traditions to maintain. Their festivals, tied intricately to the agricultural calendar, reflected a deep connection to the land and its cycles. These celebrations were imbued with a sense of reverence for the gods who governed the natural world, a reminder that despite political overlords, it was still the divine that held ultimate sway. So, amid the Roman festivities and the burgeoning influence of Christianity, the Egyptians carried on with their lives, blending resilience with pragmatism. Theirs was a world where myth and reality danced a delicate waltz, each step influenced by the past, yet inexorably moving toward an uncertain future. In this land of contrasts, where the grandiose dreams of emperors met the humble toil of farmers, the story of Egypt unfolded. It was a tale of survival and adaptation, where the promise of prosperity was as tantalizing as it was elusive. But as the year turned, and the cycle began, the Nile's eternal flow promised another chance, a chance to harvest not just crops, but hope itself. As we move forward in this exploration of Roman Egypt, remember that this wasn't just a period of grand conquests and imperial edicts. It was a time when daily life was shaped by the rhythms of nature, the demands of Rome, and the enduring spirit of those who called this ancient land home. We'll dive deeper into the complexities of this era, unraveling the threads of history that continue to weave their way into our understanding of the past. Stay tuned. There's much more to uncover in this fascinating journey through time. And speaking of journeys through time, let's roll back the clock to when Christianity was the scrappy underdog of the religious world, trying to find its place in the sun-baked landscape of Roman Egypt. Now, if you think the rise of Christianity was smooth sailing, you'd be as mistaken as someone trying to row a boat up the Nile during a flood. The reality was far more turbulent, with Christianity creeping into Egyptian society like an unexpected guest who eventually takes over the party playlist. In the early days, Christians in Egypt were still a minority group, huddling in small communities and keeping their heads down. The Roman Empire wasn't exactly handing out welcome baskets to new religions, especially those that didn't play nice with the established pantheon. Persecution wasn't just a possibility, it was a grim reality. Christians were often the scapegoats for any woes that befell the empire, from military defeats to natural disasters. It was a time when being part of the Christian fold could land you in some seriously hot water, or more likely, cold chains. But then came a game-changer in 313 CE, the Edict of Milan. Imagine it as the ancient equivalent of a cease and desist letter to those persecuting Christians. Issued by Emperor Constantine the Great and his co-emperor Licinius, this edict legalized Christianity across the Roman Empire. It was like flipping a switch, turning Christianity from an outlawed belief into a state-sanctioned religion. For Egyptian Christians, who had been practicing their faith under the radar, it was nothing short of a divine intervention. Constantine's conversion to Christianity wasn't just a personal epiphany. It was a political maneuver that reshaped the Roman Empire's religious landscape. The emperor, savvy as a cat with 9 lives, saw the growing influence of Christianity and decided it was better to embrace it than to fight it. His decision was as much about power dynamics as it was about faith. a strategic move that ensured his legacy in the annals of history. With the Edict of Milan, Christian communities in Egypt began to flourish like flowers after a desert rain. Churches started popping up faster than you could say, Amen, and Christian leaders emerged as key figures in society. Bishops, once obscure figures in the religious tapestry, became influential power brokers, their voices echoing in the halls of power. Think of them as the ancient world's influencers, but instead of hawking beauty products, they were spreading the word of God. As Christianity gained ground, it began to shape public and private life in Egypt in ways that were both profound and subtle. The new religion brought with it a fresh set of traditions, some of which might seem eerily familiar to modern eyes. For instance, the idea of celebrating the birth of Christ started to take hold, planting the seeds for what we now recognize as Christmas. This wasn't an overnight transformation, mind you. It was more like a slow brew, with Christian customs gradually weaving their way into the fabric of Egyptian life. But don't start envisioning nativity scenes and Christmas trees just yet. The early Christian communities were more focused on spiritual observance than festive flair. Their celebrations were marked by prayer and reflection rather than feasting and gift-giving. Remember, these were people who had endured persecution and hardship, and their celebrations reflected a Sama sense of gratitude and reverence. Yet, as Christianity spread its roots deeper into Egyptian soil, it couldn't help but rub shoulders with existing pagan customs, and this is where things got interesting. The tension between pagan rites and Christian practices was as palpable as the heat of a midday sun. For centuries, Egyptians had celebrated their own festivals, rich with ritual and symbolism, and these didn't just vanish overnight. Pagan festivals like the Feast of Isis, which honored the goddess of fertility and magic, were deeply ingrained in the cultural psyche. These celebrations involved processions, offerings, and communal gatherings, elements that weren't entirely dissimilar to later Christian festivities. It's almost as if the two traditions were dancing a delicate waltz, each step revealing both the allure and the friction between them. This cultural dance wasn't just limited to festivals. It permeated daily life, influencing everything from art to architecture. Christian symbols began to appear alongside traditional Egyptian motifs, creating a unique fusion that was both intriguing and, at times, contentious. The cross, once a symbol of Roman execution, was now being woven into the very fabric of Egyptian art, standing shoulder to shoulder with the ankh and the scarab. As Christianity's grip tightened, the old gods didn't just fade away quietly. They lingered in the shadows, their presence felt in the silent corners of temples and the whispered prayers of those who still held them dear. This wasn't just a religious transition. It was a cultural upheaval, a clash of ideologies that would reshape Egypt's identity for centuries to come. Yet, despite the friction, there was also a remarkable adaptability at play. Egyptians, ever pragmatic, began to integrate elements of Christianity into their lives, blending the old with the new in a way that was uniquely their own. This wasn't a simple case of replacing one belief system with another. It was a rich tapestry of faiths, each thread contributing to the overall fabric of society. So, as the 4th century rolled on, Egypt found itself at a crossroads. The ancient traditions that had defined its culture for millennia were now sharing the stage with a new faith, one that promised salvation and eternal life. It was a time of transition, a period where the past and the future were inextricably linked, each shaping the other in ways that were both profound and unexpected. As we continue our exploration of this fascinating era, remember that the story of Christianity in Egypt is far from over. It's a tale of resilience, adaptation, and transformation, a narrative as complex and compelling as the land itself. There's much more to uncover in this journey through history, so stay tuned for the next chapter in our adventure through time. In the grand tapestry of history, the narrative of Egypt under Roman rule is a vivid thread interwoven with political intrigue, cultural transformation, and the relentless march of time. As the 4th century gave way to the 5th, it seemed that every grain of sand in Egypt was whispering a new story, one of resilience and transformation. The fusion of Egyptian traditions with Roman customs was the stage for an unexpected protagonist, Christianity. This faith, once a flickering candle in the darkness of persecution, had now become a blazing torch of influence across the Roman Empire. The rise of Christianity in Egypt was like swapping out a black and white film for a Technicolor epic. It wasn't just a matter of faith. It was about reshaping society from the ground up. With Constantine's conversion and the subsequent Edict of Milan, Christianity went from being a clandestine movement to the empire's official religion, turning the spiritual landscape on its head. The old guards, who once ruled with the grandeur of Hollywood stars, found themselves abruptly relegated to supporting roles. And yet, the transition was anything but seamless. This was a time when the past and future were elbowing each other for room at the table, and the stakes were as high as the soaring columns of an Egyptian temple. With the newfound legitimacy of Christianity, Egypt saw proliferation of churches. From Alexandria to Thebes, these new spiritual hubs began to dart the landscape like dandelions after a spring rain. The architecture of these early churches was a fascinating blend of styles, borrowing elements from both Roman basilicas and traditional Egyptian design. It was as if the architects had taken a leaf out of the divine playbook, creating spaces that invited both awe and introspection. Yet, while these monuments to the new faith rose from the earth, the economic realities of Roman Egypt were anything but heavenly. The Roman grip on Egypt's agricultural output was as tight as a miser's fist around a coin. The empire's reliance on Egyptian grain was no secret. It was the very lifeblood of Roman power. If you ever wondered how to buy an empire's favor, look no further than a bushel of wheat. In the 4th century, Egypt was producing enough grain to fill the bellies of Rome's citizens, and then some. But this wasn't about charity. It was about control. The Romans were masters of logistics, ensuring that the grain flowed as smoothly as the Nile itself. Yet, this agricultural prowess was bolstered by the labor of countless Egyptian farmers who toiled under a tax burden that could make even modern taxpayers cringe. Taxes, as any Roman would tell you, were the price of civilization. But in Egypt, they were more like a relentless tide, rising with every harvest. The grain tax, known as the annona, was a constant in the lives of Egyptian farmers. These taxes weren't just for show. They were meticulously calculated, often comprising up to 1/3 of a farmer's yield. It was like trying to fill a bottomless pit with a teaspoon. Every sheaf of wheat, every ear of barley was accounted for with a precision that would put a Swiss watchmaker to shame. But let's not sugarcoat it. Roman Egypt was a place of stark contrasts. While the grain flowed abundantly to Roman tables, the average Egyptian farmer was more likely to dine on dreams than delicacies. Their lives were a testament to the art of survival, a balancing act between feeding their families and appeasing the tax collectors who hovered like vultures. The Roman overseers were as unyielding as the desert sun, ensuring that the empire's granaries were stocked to the brim, no matter the cost to the locals. Amidst this backdrop of economic exploitation and cultural cross-pollination, the seeds of Christmas, as a recognized holiday, were quietly being planted. The celebration of Christ's birth, initially observed in small, intimate gatherings, began to take on a life of its own as Christianity's influence grew. This wasn't just about marking a date on the calendar. It was about creating a sense of community and belonging in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. It was the promise of warmth and light in the depths of winter, a beacon of hope for those who had known little but hardship. But let's not get carried away with romantic notions of early Christmas celebrations. The reality was far more grounded. While Rome's elite might have indulged in feasting and merrymaking, the average Christian in Egypt marked the occasion with simple acts of devotion. There were no extravagant displays of wealth or opulence. Instead, the focus was on spiritual renewal and the reaffirmation of faith. In a world where material wealth was often elusive, these acts of faith were riches beyond measure. As Christianity solidified its hold on Egypt, it began to weave its way into the very fabric of everyday life. Festivals that had once been dedicated to the old gods were repurposed to fit the new Christian ethos. The winter solstice, long celebrated in various forms across cultures, became entwined with the narrative of Christ's birth. It was a masterstroke of adaptation, blending the familiar with the new to create a celebration that resonated across the social spectrum. Yet, despite these changes, the spirit of resilience that defined Egyptian society remained unbroken. The people of Egypt had weathered countless storms, from the rise and fall of pharaohs to the relentless demands of empire. Now, in the face of religious transformation, they continued to adapt and endure, crafting a new identity that honored the past while embracing the future. It was a testament to the indomitable spirit of a land that had seen it all. And so, as we wrap up our journey through Rome and Egypt, let's take a moment to appreciate the remarkable legacy of this era. It's a story that speaks to the complexity of human experience, a narrative as multifaceted as the people who lived it. From the grain fields of the Nile to the grand halls of Rome, the echoes of this time continue to resonate, reminding us of the enduring power of faith, resilience, and adaptation. In the end, the tale of Christmas in ancient Egypt under Roman rule is more than just a historical footnote. It's a reflection of our shared humanity, a reminder that even amidst the harshest of circumstances, the light of hope and renewal can shine through. So, as you ponder this chapter of history, perhaps with a warm cup of something festive in hand, remember how far we've come from those humble, grain-taxing beginnings. Here's to the journey and to the stories that continue to shape our world. In the dusty cradle of Macedonia, a place where ambition was practically an heirloom passed down through bloodlines, a boy named Alexander was born in 356 BC. Now, we're not talking about just any kid from the block. We're talking about a young lad who was tutored by none other than Aristotle himself. Yes, that Aristotle, the philosopher with a penchant for logic and a resume longer than a scroll of papyrus. Imagine being schooled by the guy who basically invented the idea of knowing stuff. It's like getting basketball tips from Michael Jordan, only with more togas and less sweatbands. Under Aristotle's wing, young Alexander wasn't just learning the classics. He was being groomed to think big, like empire-sized big. Aristotle wasn't just teaching him how to read and write. He was teaching him how to rule. From ethics to politics, science to philosophy, Alexander absorbed it all like a sponge. It's no wonder that by the time he took the throne, he had a library in his brain that could rival the later Library of Alexandria, though hopefully with fewer overdue fees. But let's not skip over his teenage years, when Alexander proved he wasn't just a bookworm. At the tender age of 16, when most of us were busy figuring out how to parallel park, Alexander was handed his first military command. His father, King Philip Roman II, was off conquering something or other, as one does, and left the young prince in charge of Macedonia. Not one to fiddle with fidget spinners, Alexander led a campaign against a rebellious tribe, the Mede, and founded a city named Alexandropolis. Yep, he was naming cities after himself before it was cool, and before he even hit legal drinking age. And speaking of conquering, let's talk about Bucephalus, the legendary horse that Alexander tamed. Legend has it that this wild stallion was untamable until teenage Alexander figured out that the horse was just afraid of its own shadow. Showing a deftness for problem-solving, Alexander turned Bucephalus toward the sun, so the shadow fell behind him. Voila, horse tamed. It's a great story, and it's stuck around because it paints Alexander as a natural leader who understood fear better than most. But let's be honest, if taming horses were that simple, rodeos would be a lot less entertaining. Fast forward to 336 BC, and Alexander, at the ripe old age of 20, found himself thrust onto the throne after a dramatic twist of fate. His father, Philip Roman II, was assassinated at a wedding, because what's a royal event without a touch of Game of Thrones drama? Suddenly, Alexander was not just the kid with a knack for philosophy and a way with horses. He was a king with a kingdom to manage, and soon enough, an empire to expand. Here's where the legend starts to get a little starry-eyed. Alexander, often portrayed as this boy genius with a sword, was indeed a military prodigy, but let's not forget the harsh realities of his reign. His rule was built on the back of a fiercely trained army and financed by the riches of a kingdom that had been expanding under his father's iron fist. Conquests weren't just about glory. They were about economics, securing resources, and ensuring that the Macedonian machine kept churning. One of the quirkier stories from his early campaigns involves the Gordian knot. Legend said this knot was so complex that whoever could untie it was destined to rule all of Asia. Alexander, never one for needless puzzles, approached it like the pragmatic warrior he was. Depending on the version you believe, he either cut it with his sword or found a sneaky loophole by pulling out the pin. Either way, it's a great metaphor for his approach to problems. Why bother with subtlety when you've got a sharp blade and a sharper mind? While the myths surrounding Alexander often paint him as a heroic figure who was always one step ahead, the reality was far more complex. His genius wasn't just in his military tactics, but in his ability to unite a diverse array of followers through charisma, fear, and a healthy dose of propaganda. It wasn't just that he was a boy king with a knack for strategy. He was also a shrewd politician who understood the power of image and narrative. In the end, Alexander's early years set the stage for what would become one of the most audacious campaigns in history. His ambition was as boundless as the lands he sought to conquer, and while the stories tend to focus on his victories, let's not forget the human cost. Every conquered city, every battle won was paid for in blood, sweat, and the occasional untamed horse. So yes, Alexander was great, but greatness, in his case, came with a hefty price tag and more than a few untied knots. Alexander's early escapades were just the warm-up act for the grand performance that was the invasion of the Persian Empire. This wasn't just a military operation. It was like organizing the world's most ambitious road trip. Only, instead of taking selfies at scenic overlooks, Alexander was busy toppling kingdoms. Imagine trying to coordinate a convoy of 40,000 soldiers, their gear, and enough provisions to sustain them across deserts and mountains. No Google Maps, no GPS, just a whole lot of hopeful marching and trust in the stars, and the occasional local guide. The logistics of this operation would make even the most seasoned event planner break into a cold sweat. Macedon, not exactly the wealthiest kingdom on the block, had to stretch its resources like a college student's last dollar. This meant leveraging every bit of the economic engine his father had built. Philip's conquests had filled Macedonian coffers with gold and silver, but funding a transcontinental campaign required Alexander to dip into reserves and then some. War may be hell, but it's also ridiculously expensive. Think millions in today's currency just to get the show on the road. But why Persia? Well, for starters, it was the biggest, baddest empire around, and Alexander had a bit of a chip on his shoulder about wanting to prove himself as the ultimate conqueror. Persia was like the final boss in a video game. If you could take it down, you earned the bragging rights of a lifetime. Plus, there was the small matter of revenge. See, Persia had been a thorn in Greece's side for a while, and Alexander, channeling his inner avenger, was keen on settling old scores. The campaign kicked off in 334 BC when Alexander crossed the Hellespont, modern-day Dardanelles. He was greeted by the Persian satraps at the Battle of Granicus, where he wasted no time showcasing his tactical genius. The Persians had the numbers, but Alexander had the element of surprise. Oh, and a cavalry that moved like synchronized swimmers with swords. He won the battle, and in the process, set the tone for the rest of his campaigns, audacious, fast-paced, and incredibly efficient. As the Macedonians plowed deeper into Persian territory, they left a trail of cities either conquered or willingly joining the growing empire. Alexander was a master of propaganda, often presenting himself as a liberator rather than a conqueror. And here's where the myth gets a little murky. While he's often painted as a benevolent and charismatic leader, the reality involved a fair amount of coercion and fear. You don't get to the top without stepping on a few toes, or, in Alexander's case, entire nations. Yet, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The march through Asia Minor wasn't just a straight line of victories. Alexander and his troops had their fair share of misadventures, the kind that would make for a hilarious travel blog. There was the time they got lost in the Jedrosian desert, a miscalculation that cost the lives of thousands of men and horses. Picture 1,000 soldiers, parched and sunburned, cursing Alexander's name under their breath, while wondering if they should have taken that left turn at Albuquerque. And let's not forget the soldiers' grumblings about Alexander's relentless pace. To call him a workaholic would be like calling the sun a bit warm. The man was driven by an insatiable ambition that left his men gasping for breath. While Alexander saw the world as a blank canvas for his empire, his soldiers often saw it as a series of never-ending marches with little time for R&R. Complaints about sore feet and homesickness were common, with soldiers wishing they could trade in their spears for a nice, relaxing farmstead back home. Economically, the campaign was a double-edged sword for Macedon. On one hand, the spoils of war were immense. Gold, silver, and treasures flowed back to the homeland, bolstering its economy. On the other hand, the cost of maintaining such a vast army was staggering. Each conquered territory had to be managed, garrisoned, and integrated, which meant more money, more resources, and more headaches for the Macedonian treasury. And while we're busting myths, let's talk about the so-called unity of Alexander's empire. While he did manage to keep it together during his lifetime, the glue that held it was more duct tape than superglue. The empire was a patchwork of cultures, languages, and traditions, and Alexander's attempts to integrate them, like encouraging marriages between his soldiers and local women, were met with mixed success. He was a visionary, sure, but even visionaries occasionally trip over their own shoelaces. As Alexander's campaign continued, he faced increasingly formidable challenges. The Battle of Issus in 333 BC saw him outnumbered by Persian King Darius' Roman III forces. But Alexander, ever the tactician, exploited Darius's blunders with deft precision. After a decisive victory, he captured Darius's family, which he treated with respect, displaying a blend of ruthlessness and magnanimity that kept his enemies on their toes. The conquest of Egypt in 332 BC was a feather in Alexander's cap. He was welcomed as a liberator and crowned pharaoh. This was more than just a strategic win. It was a public relations coup. By aligning himself with Egyptian gods, he enhanced his status, weaving himself into the fabric of the lands he conquered. And let's face it, being called son of Zeus is quite the ego boost, even for someone with as much swagger as Alexander. Yet, for all his successes, Alexander was no stranger to the harsh realities of warfare. The siege of Tyre in 332 BC was a brutal 7-month ordeal. While the city eventually fell, it came with heavy casualties on both sides. For Alexander, it was a stark reminder that not every conquest would be a walk in the park or a sprint across a desert. As Alexander's empire expanded, so did the challenges of governance. Each victory brought new territories to administer, cultures to understand, and local politics to navigate. The romantic notion of a unified empire was often at odds with the reality of maintaining control over such a vast expanse. Alexander's solution: founding cities, lots of them. From Alexandria in Egypt to others scattered across Asia, these cities served as administrative hubs, spreading Greek culture far and wide. But they also required garrisons and governors, adding layers of complexity to an already intricate empire. By the time Alexander reached the Indus Valley in 326 BC, his troops were weary. The Battle of Hydaspes against King Porus was another testament to Alexander's strategic prowess, but it also highlighted the limits of his ambition. His men, exhausted from years of campaigning, were reaching their breaking point. When Alexander suggested marching further into India, his troops famously mutinied, forcing him to turn back. Even the greatest of leaders must reckon with the morale of their followers, and Alexander was no exception. This turning point marked the beginning of the end for Alexander's relentless expansion. The journey back to Babylon was fraught with challenges, including the aforementioned desert debacle. Yet, even as the empire faced logistical and administrative strains, Alexander remained undeterred, dreaming of new conquests, perhaps Arabia next. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. The empire Alexander built was both a testament to his genius and a reflection of the complexities of human ambition. His campaigns were a blend of mythic heroism and stark reality, a dance between the desire for glory and the practicalities of power. While history often remembers him as a singular force, the truth is that his empire was a collaborative effort, a vast tapestry woven by countless hands, each with its own story to tell. As we leave Alexander on the cusp of his next grand vision, with an empire under his command and countless challenges ahead, remember that his legacy is not just the stuff of legends. It's a vivid reminder that even the most extraordinary achievements come with a price, paid in the currency of human endeavor and sacrifice. Stay tuned as we explore how Alexander's empire would face its greatest test yet, and the remarkable, tumultuous journey that lay ahead. As we leave Alexander on the cusp of his next grand vision, we find him not just flexing his military muscles, but also trying his hand at cultural fusion, a kind of ancient world mashup that would make any modern-day multicultural guru tip their hat. Now, Alexander wasn't just about conquering lands. He was about conquering minds, too. By the time he reached the Persian heartlands, he was already dreaming of a new world order where Greeks and Persians would coexist in perfect harmony. Or at least, that was the plan. Let's start with the mass weddings at Susa in 324 BC, a spectacle that would make even the most extravagant royal weddings look like a backyard barbecue. Alexander orchestrated this event with the precision of a general and the flair of a showman. He married off 10,000 of his soldiers to Persian women, including taking 2 Persian wives himself, Stadera, the daughter of Darius Roman III, and Parsades, the daughter of Artaxerxes Roman III. This wasn't just a romantic gesture, it was a political strategy wrapped in wedding vows. Alexander hoped these unions would bind his Greek and Persian subjects together, creating a seamless empire. Instead, it turned out to be more of a cultural tug-of-war, with the soldiers grumbling about their new in-laws and the Persians skeptical of these foreign guests crashing their family reunions. Alexander's attempts at cultural integration didn't stop at weddings. He adopted several Persian customs, including the practice of proskyneses, where subjects prostrated themselves before him. To his Macedonian soldiers, this was tantamount to sacrilege, like asking a group of New Yorkers to start saying "y'all." The soldiers, raised on a diet of egalitarian Macedonian values, weren't thrilled about bowing and scraping, viewing it as a bridge too far. Alexander, however, was determined to become a kind of living guard king, straddling the line between mortal and divine, Greek and Persian. It was a bold move, but not everyone was buying what he was selling. Now, speaking of bold moves, let's talk about Alexander's leadership style. 1 part military genius, 2 parts unpredictable maverick. The guy had a knack for inspiring loyalty, sure, but he also had a penchant for outlandish behavior that could leave even his closest companions scratching their heads. Take his famous drinking habits, for instance. It's no secret that Alexander liked to indulge in a tipple or 2 or 10. His legendary benders were the stuff of royal gossip, with tales of drunken bacchanals that would make a frat party look like a book club meeting. But these weren't just about revelry. They served as a way for Alexander to bond with his men, a shared experience that blurred the lines between king and comrades. Unfortunately, they also led to some questionable decisions, and the occasional heated argument that turned deadly, like the time he killed his friend, Cletus the Black, in a drunken rage. Talk about a party foul. This brings us to the myth of the benevolent conqueror, a narrative that paints Alexander as a kind of ancient-day peacekeeper with a sword. Sure, he had his moments of magnanimity, like sparing the lives of Darius's family or granting clemency to cities that surrendered without a fight. But let's not polish the halo too brightly. Benevolence was often a veneer, a strategic tool to win hearts and minds while keeping the machinery of conquest well-oiled. Beneath the surface, Alexander's campaigns were brutal affairs, marked by sieges, slaughters, and subjugation. The siege of Tyre, the sack of Thebes, and the razing of Persepolis weren't exactly peacekeeping missions. They were stark reminders that Alexander's vision of unity often came at the sharp end of a spear. Economically, Alexander's multicultural ambitions were a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the integration of Greek and Persian elements could potentially create a dynamic and prosperous empire, with trade routes and cultural exchanges supersizing the economy. On the other hand, maintaining such a vast and diverse entity was like trying to juggle flaming swords while balancing on a tightrope. The costs of administration, garrisoning troops, and managing local politics were astronomical. It required a delicate balance of diplomacy, coercion, and the occasional show of force. For every city that welcomed Alexander as a liberator, there were those who saw him as an occupier. It was a complex dance, and Alexander, ever the ambitious choreographer, was determined to keep the rhythm going. As we delve deeper into Alexander's world, we find a leader who was as much a product of his time as he was a shaper of it. His attempts to fuse cultures were revolutionary, but they also highlighted the challenges of empire building in a world where identity was deeply rooted in tradition and history. Alexander's vision was grand, but the reality was a mosaic of human ambitions, fears, and contradictions. In trying to create a new world, he was also navigating the old one, with all its complexities and pitfalls. As we look toward the horizon of Alexander's journey, remember that his story isn't just about the glory of conquest or the romance of cultural fusion. It's a tale of ambition and audacity, of a man who dared to dream big, but whose dreams were often tempered by the harsh realities of power. As the sun sets on this chapter of Alexander's life, we're left with a leader who is both larger than life and undeniably human, striving to leave a mark that would echo through the ages. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of his legacy, exploring the triumphs and tragedies that defined his remarkable, turbulent reign. As the sun rose on Alexander's next chapter, he found himself staring at the vast, untamed lands of India. This wasn't just another dart on the map to conquer. It was an enigma wrapped in a riddle, served with a side of curry. The subcontinent was unlike anything Alexander had faced before, and it offered both a tantalizing challenge and a potential jackpot of wealth and glory. But before he could claim his prize, he had to tackle the formidable King Porus, who was as tall as he was tenacious. And that's saying something, considering Porus reportedly stood over 7 feet tall. The encounter with Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes River in 326 BC was a masterclass in strategy. Alexander, always the chess player, had to think a dozen moves ahead. With 50,000 soldiers at his back, including his beloved companion cavalry, he faced Porus's 30,000 strong army, bolstered by 200 war elephants. Yes, elephants, those enormous, tusked beasts that had Alexander's soldiers wondering if they'd crossed into some mythical land where creatures were supersized and gravity was optional. Imagine their surprise when they realized they'd have to fight these walking fortresses with little more than spears and nerves of steel. Alexander, ever the tactical genius, chose to attack at dawn during a monsoon downpour, because if you're going to fight elephants, why not add a little mud to the mix? He cleverly divided his forces, using a feigned retreat to lure Porus into a trap, then struck with a flanking maneuver that would make any general proud. The battle was brutal, with elephants trampling soldiers and the air thick with the sounds of war cries and clashing metal. Yet Alexander's audacity paid off. Despite the odds, he managed to outmaneuver Porus, capturing him in the process. In a move that was part diplomacy, part PR stunt, Alexander, showing his flair for drama, asked Porus how he wished to be treated. The king's legendary response, "Like a king." This pithy reply impressed Alexander so much that he not only spared Porus's life, but also reinstated him as ruler of his kingdom, now as a vassal of the burgeoning Macedonian Empire. It was a strategic win, turning a potential enemy into an ally, while showcasing Alexander's capacity for magnanimity when it suited him. But the elephants weren't the only wildlife that caught Alexander's attention. He was fascinated by India's exotic animals, like some ancient David Attenborough with a sword. Tigers, peacocks, even the occasional rhinoceros. Alexander was enthralled. In fact, he sent back a menagerie of exotic creatures to Greece as living trophies, proof of his far-flung conquests. This was less about scientific curiosity and more about showcasing his dominion over nature itself, adding to the mythology of Alexander as a ruler not only of men, but of the world's wonders. Yet, beneath the veneer of conquest and curiosity, cracks were beginning to show. Alexander's relentless drive was taking its toll on his army. These weren't robots programmed for endless battle. They were men who missed their homes, their families, and a life where the most pressing danger wasn't a charging elephant. By the time Alexander suggested pushing further into India, his troops had reached their breaking point. Exhausted and mutinous, they refused to go any further. It was a rare moment where Alexander had to concede to the realities of human endurance. Even the greatest of leaders had to recognize when enough was enough, and Alexander, reluctantly, turned his army back. This decision marked a shift in Alexander's campaign, not just geographically but psychologically. His ambitions were boundless, but his resources, human and material, were finite. The cost of maintaining his empire was astronomical, with the treasury bleeding silver like a poorly managed tap. Each new conquest required garrisons, administration, and the ever-present need to placate local populations. The logistics were staggering, rivaling any modern-day military operation in complexity and scale. Back on the road toward Babylon, Alexander's journey was fraught with hardship. The infamous march through the Gedrosian desert was a miscalculation of epic proportions. Imagine trying to cross a landscape so inhospitable that even camels would think twice. Supplies ran low, tempers flared, and the mortality rate soared. It was a grim reminder that no matter how great the leader, nature always has the upper hand. But let's not forget the internal dynamics of Alexander's entourage. As his campaigns dragged on, paranoia began to seep into his leadership like a slow poison. Trust was a rare commodity, and Alexander's inner circle was a cocktail of ambition, loyalty, and betrayal. He executed several of his closest companions, suspecting them of treachery. Whether these suspicions were justified or the product of a mind stretched thin by constant warfare is open to debate, but the impact was clear. Alexander was increasingly isolated, his once unbreakable bonds with his men fraying under the weight of suspicion. The economic strain was palpable. Each new city founded was both a jewel in the crown and a burden on the purse. Administration costs soared, and the logistics of keeping the empire knitted together were akin to managing the world's most complicated family reunion. Yet, Alexander's vision never wavered. He dreamed of unifying his vast territories into a cohesive whole with a shared culture and economic prosperity. It was a noble goal, but one that was increasingly at odds with the practicalities of empire management. As we approach the twilight of Alexander's journey, we see a leader grappling with the duality of his legacy. He was a conqueror, yes, but also a visionary who sought to transcend the boundaries of his time. His fascination with India's wildlife, his strategic genius at Hydaspes, and his attempts at cultural integration all speak to a man who was both of his world and ahead of it. Yet, his story is also a cautionary tale of ambition unchecked, of dreams that soared too close to the sun. Stay tuned as we delve into the final chapters of Alexander's saga, where the empire he built faces its most daunting challenges and the shadow of mortality looms large. As Alexander's story hurtles toward its dramatic conclusion, we find him back in Babylon in 323 BC, where the simmering pot of ambition, paranoia, and exhaustion is about to boil over. At just 32 years old, Alexander was at the pinnacle of his power, having carved out an empire stretching from Greece to northwestern India. Yet this was no fairy tale ending. The young conqueror was grappling with the realities of maintaining such a vast territory, and it seemed the universe had one final twist in store for him. It was here, in the heart of his sprawling dominion, that Alexander fell ill, struck down by a mysterious ailment that would spark centuries of speculation and conspiracy theories. Let's dive into the juicy details, shall we? Alexander's death has been a historical whodunit, with theories ranging from malaria to typhoid fever, and yes, even the dramatic flair of poisoning. Now, the poisoning theory is a crowd favorite, conjuring images of shadowy figures, slipping something nefarious into his goblet. But hold your horses, there's no concrete evidence to back this up. It's the kind of narrative that sells books and fuels Hollywood scripts, but historically, it's shakier than a Jenga tower in an earthquake. More likely, Alexander succumbed to a disease, exacerbated by his relentless lifestyle, and perhaps even a touch of overindulgence in Babylonian nightlife. After all, when you're running an empire, moderation isn't exactly at the top of the to-do list. Alexander's illness began with a fever that intensified over several days. Plutarch, that ancient chronicler with a penchant for the dramatic, tells us how Alexander's condition deteriorated rapidly, leaving him bedridden and unable to speak. The fever raged, and within 11 days, the young conqueror was gone. For someone who had lived life at a blistering pace, the end came shockingly fast. It was as if time itself had decided that Alexander had used up more than his fair share. With the king's death, chaos ensued. Picture a game of musical chairs with the stakes cranked up to life-or-death levels. Alexander left no clear heir. His only legitimate son, Alexander Roman IV, was born posthumously, and his half-brother, Philip Roman III Hideous, was mentally impaired. The empire, a vast patchwork of cultures and territories held together by Alexander's charisma and strategic genius, was suddenly leaderless. It was like removing the keystone from an arch. The whole structure threatened to collapse. The Diadochi, or successors, were Alexander's top generals and trusted companions, suddenly thrust into the role of would-be emperors. Each saw himself as the rightful heir, and thus began the wars of the Diadochi, a series of bloody conflicts that would tear the empire apart over the next few decades. The fallout from Alexander's death was like a geopolitical hurricane, with territories being swapped, allies turned into enemies, and loyalties tested on every front. It was a free-for-all, with generals like Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Antigonus carving out their own kingdoms from the remnants of Alexander's once unified empire. Economically, the fragmentation of the empire was a disaster. The grand vision of a cohesive, integrated realm where East met West was replaced by a patchwork of squabbling states. Trade routes that had been painstakingly established began to fracture, and the flow of goods and resources stumbled like a drunkard on a tightrope. Each successor was more interested in consolidating personal power than in preserving Alexander's legacy. It was less a passing of the torch and more a frantic scramble for the last piece of cake at a birthday party. Yet, as the dust settled on the battlefield of succession, Alexander's legacy began to take shape in ways he might never have imagined. The cultural and intellectual exchanges he set in motion left an indelible mark on history. The spread of Hellenistic culture, an eclectic blend of Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian influences, was one of the most enduring impacts of his conquests. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt became centers of learning and innovation, attracting scholars, scientists, and artists from across the known world. The famed Library of Alexandria, with its vast collection of scrolls, was a testament to this cultural fusion, a beacon of knowledge that lit up the ancient world. Let's not forget the military tactics and strategies that Alexander pioneered. His use of the phalanx formation, combined with the shock and awe of cavalry charges, set the standard for warfare for centuries. Commanders from Rome to the Renaissance studied his campaigns, eager to emulate his success. Even today, military academies teach the principles of his battles, proving that while his empire may have fractured, his influence is anything but. As for Alexander himself, his image was reshaped and repurposed through the ages. To the Romans, he was a model of leadership and ambition. In the medieval Islamic world, he was celebrated as a philosopher king, a seeker of knowledge. His life became a canvas for countless interpretations, each generation projecting its own values and aspirations onto his story. He was seen as both hero and tyrant, visionary and despot, a testament to the complexity of his character. So, as we wrap up our journey through the life and legacy of Alexander the Great, what are we left with? A conqueror whose dreams were as vast as his empire, yet whose mortal life was all too brief. A leader whose charisma and cunning could inspire fierce loyalty and intense rivalry. A man who, in seeking to unite the world, left behind a legacy that would continue to shape it long after his empire had faded into history. In the end, Alexander's story is a reminder of the dual nature of human ambition. It's a tale of triumph and tragedy, where the pursuit of greatness is tempered by the realities of power and the limits of mortality. It's about the pursuit of a legacy, not just in the monuments we build or the lands we conquer, but in the ideas we inspire and the histories we leave behind. Alexander the Great may have died young, but in shaping the world, he ensured that his legend would live forever. And if nothing else, that's a legacy worthy of the title Great. In the bustling world of late 17th century Russia, where the political landscape was about as stable as a toddler on roller skates, entered one of history's most intriguing characters, Peter the Great. Born in 1672, Peter was the kind of guy who could turn a royal court into a circus, and not always the kind with fun clowns. His childhood was a kaleidoscope of chaos, ambition, and the occasional cannonball. Let's kick things off in Moscow, where young Peter found himself thrust into a court riddled with more intrigue than a season finale of a soap opera. The Russian court was a perilous playground of power struggles, backstabbing relatives, and a general atmosphere of trust no one. At the ripe age of 10, Peter became co-Tsar with his half-brother, Ivan V, thanks to a compromise hammered out after a brief but bloody power struggle. And by compromise, I mean Peter's older sister, Sophia, became the effective regent, a role she embraced with the enthusiasm of a stage mom at a beauty pageant. Now, Peter wasn't your typical royal child. Instead of elegant banquets and genteel tutors, his early education involved a lot more mud and muskets. At a time when Europe was embroiled in the Age of Enlightenment, Russia was still a few centuries behind, culturally speaking. So, Peter took to learning in his own way, assembled a toy army that wasn't exactly toy-sized. We're talking about a full-scale live-action military school for him and his pals, complete with real cannons and muskets. No Nerf guns for this kid. He preferred the kind that went boom. Peter's fascination with the military was more than just a childhood phase. It was his first love. You see, Russia was a massive landlocked nation, and Peter had an itch for boats that no amount of horse-drawn sleds could scratch. So, he and his toy army would play war games, which often resulted in actual injuries, and occasionally a less than enthusiastic casualty report. But hey, they say genius is often misunderstood. Amidst this unruly upbringing, Peter developed an insatiable curiosity. This led him to the German Quarter in Moscow, a haven for foreign artisans and merchants who introduced him to Western technology and ideas. This microcosm of Europe within Russia tickled his brain with concepts like shipbuilding and navigation. Peter was so enamored with ships that he built his first boat at the age of 16, an English-style sailboat that he proudly sailed on the Yorza River, much to the bewilderment of his more conservative courtiers. Now, let's talk about the state of Russia before Peter took the throne. Imagine a vast, sprawling nation, rich in resources but poor in infrastructure and innovation. The country was largely agrarian, with a social hierarchy as rigid as a Soviet-era apartment block. The economy was stuck in the mud, literally and metaphorically. Serfdom was the order of the day, and the Russian Orthodox Church wielded more influence than any Instagram influencer ever could. Politically, Russia was a patchwork of territories held together by a tenuous central authority. The Romanov dynasty, to which Peter belonged, had only been in power for a few decades, following the time of troubles, a period so chaotic it makes Game of Thrones look like a picnic. The Russian Tsardom was a place where boyars, nobility, and streltsy, elite military corps, vied for power, often with swords and occasionally with poison. Peter's rough-and-tumble education in this environment was less about books and more about survival. He learned to read people, who to trust, who to fear, and who to keep at arm's length. His childhood was a masterclass in political maneuvering, as he witnessed firsthand the machinations of his sister Sophia and the fickle loyalties of the boyars. In a world where alliances shifted like the Russian weather, Peter developed a shrewdness that would later serve him well as a ruler. But back to Peter's budding naval ambitions. Remember, Russia was mostly landlocked, with no significant navy to speak of. Peter, however, saw the sea as a gateway to the West, a world of trade, technology, and influence. His dream was to turn Russia into a maritime power, a vision that began with his boyhood obsession with ships. Even before he officially took the throne, Peter embarked on what could be described as a DIY crash course in shipbuilding. He surrounded himself with Dutch shipwrights, English engineers, and anyone who could help him understand the intricacies of naval architecture. Peter was never one to shy away from manual labor. He'd roll up his sleeves and work alongside the shipbuilders, hammer in hand, learning the craft from the keel up. His youthful enthusiasm sometimes had a way of getting out of hand, like the time he commandeered a group of his toy army friends and led them on a mock assault on a fortress. The exercise was so realistic that it ended up causing actual damage. Oops. But these escapades weren't just for fun. They were training grounds for the real thing, as Peter honed his strategic and leadership skills. So, why did all this matter? Well, Peter's unconventional childhood laid the foundation for his later reforms. By the time he ascended to full power, he had a clear vision of what he wanted Russia to become, a modern state that could stand toe-to-toe with the great powers of Europe. His early experiences shaped his relentless drive to drag Russia, kicking and screaming if necessary, into the modern age. In many ways, Peter was a man ahead of his time, with a mind that refused to be confined by tradition. His childhood adventures, while often reckless, were the seeds of a revolutionary spirit that would eventually transform the Russian landscape. And so, with a head full of dreams and a heart full of ambition, young Peter stood on the cusp of greatness, ready to set sail into a future he was determined to shape. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's just say the cannonballs were merely the opening act. As Peter stood on the brink of his grand ambitions, he knew he needed more than just a dream and a couple of cannons. Enter the Grand Embassy of 1697-1698, Peter's whirlwind European tour that was part diplomatic mission, part espionage extravaganza, and part carpentry apprenticeship. While most rulers sent ambassadors with velvet hats and flattering speeches, Peter decided to go himself, incognito, dressed as a humble shipbuilder. Because why not? The official story is that Peter traveled to Europe to form alliances against the Ottoman Empire and learn about Western technologies. But let's not kid ourselves, folks. Sure, he wanted allies, but he was also on the hunt for secrets. The kind that European shipyards, military academies, and pubs would never put in a brochure. Armed with curiosity and a motley crew of 250 Russian nobles, he embarked on this 18-month voyage, a journey that would cover over 15,000 kilometers and countless tankards of ale. Now, let's debunk a little myth here. Peter's time in the Dutch shipyards has been romanticized to the point where you'd think he single-handedly built an entire fleet with nothing but a hammer and sheer determination. In reality, Peter was more like an eager intern who asked too many questions. He did roll up his sleeves and get his hands dirty, but the Dutch were hardly fooled by his incognito act. I mean, a 6'8" Russian giant in a Dutch dockyard wasn't winning any subtlety contests. Yet Peter's efforts weren't in vain. In Zaandam and Amsterdam, he learned the art of shipbuilding from the keel to the crow's nest. He soaked up knowledge about everything from rope-making to advanced naval engineering. The Dutch, masters of the sea, taught him things that would shape his naval ambitions back home. These shipyards were Peter's classrooms, and he was the star pupil who occasionally got distracted by shiny new gadgets. But the Grand Embassy wasn't all work and no play. Peter had a notorious fondness for the nightlife, frequenting taverns and mingling with locals. Some stories paint him as a sort of 17th-century party animal, but there was method to his merriment. These social outings were Peter's way of gathering intelligence. Every pint was a potential source of information, every drinking buddy a possible informant. If knowledge was power, then Peter was determined to guzzle his way to enlightenment. While in England, Peter made a splash, quite literally, by studying shipyards and military arsenals. He even took a stroll through the Tower of London and visited the Royal Mint. The English were more than happy to show off their technological prowess, and Peter was like a kid in a candy store, if the candy were gunpowder and naval artillery. His English hosts were impressed by his insatiable curiosity, although they probably wished he'd toned down the boisterous celebrations just a tad. And speaking of celebrations, let's address the legendary tale of Peter's stay at the Sayes Court, the London home of diarist John Evelyn. Let's just say Peter wasn't exactly a model tenant. He reportedly trashed the place, turning the garden into a muddy battlefield and using precious artwork for target practice. Evelyn was less than thrilled, but somehow Peter's antics only added to his mystique. The guy had an uncanny ability to turn chaos into charisma. But beyond the revelry and reckless remodeling, Peter's European journey was a game changer. It opened his eyes to the possibilities of Western technology and governance. He saw firsthand how the Dutch and English wielded power through naval strength and economic savvy. This wasn't just about ships. It was about transforming Russia into a modern state that could flex its muscles on the international stage. Peter's European tour wasn't just about acquiring knowledge. It was about reshaping his vision for Russia. He realized that to compete with the West, he'd have to overhaul everything from the military to the bureaucracy. This meant importing experts, adopting new technologies, and perhaps most controversially, challenging the traditional Russian way of life. You could almost hear the collective gasp of the Russian boyars when Peter returned home with plans to drag them, kicking and screaming, into the modern age. But let's not forget the political maneuvering behind the scenes. The Grand Embassy was about more than just shipbuilding and spycraft. Peter was also laying the groundwork for alliances against the Ottoman Empire. He met with leaders across Europe, including King William Roman III of England and the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I. These meetings were about securing Russia's place in the European power structure. Peter was playing a long game, and his diplomatic overtures were as crucial as his carpentry lessons. Yet, not everything went according to plan. The great embassy was cut short when Peter received word of a revolt by the Streltsy back home. These elite guards had a history of political meddling, and their uprising was a direct challenge to Peter's authority. It was a rude reminder that while Peter was busy learning from the West, the old ways were still very much alive and kicking in Russia. So, with a heavy heart and a head full of ideas, Peter hurried back to Moscow to put out the fires. The Grand Embassy had been an eye-opening odyssey, but it also highlighted the monumental task ahead. Peter had glimpsed the future, but he was returning to a Russia that was still very much rooted in its past. The challenge was now to reconcile these two worlds, to forge a new path that honored his ambitious dreams while navigating the entrenched traditions of his homeland. As Peter returned to Russia, he brought with him not just plans for ships and alliances, but a radical blueprint for modernization. He was a man on a mission, determined to reshape his nation from the ground up. The grand embassy may have been over, but Peter's grand vision for Russia was just beginning to take shape, and as history would show, he was just getting started. Back in Russia, Peter the Great was a man with a plan, and not just any plan, but a blueprint so ambitious that even his horses were probably rolling their eyes. Fresh from his European escapades, Peter was convinced that Russia needed a radical makeover. His first move, the infamous beard tax. Yep, you heard that right. In 1698, Peter decided that facial hair was the enemy of progress. To him, beards symbolized the old, backward Russia, and he wanted his courtiers to look more like their clean-shaven Western counterparts. So, he slapped a tax on beards, leaving Russian men with two choices, pay up or face the razor. The beard tax was more than a cosmetic change. It was a symbol of Peter's break with tradition. Imagine the shockwaves it sent through Russian society, where beards were practically a man's badge of honor. The church wasn't thrilled either, since they believed beards were a God-given right. But in Peter's mind, modernization was worth a few grumpy boyars and discontented priests. And speaking of modernization, let's not forget St. Petersburg, Peter's gleaming new capital, his window to the west. Founded in 1703, this was no ordinary city. It was an architectural statement, a bold declaration that Russia was stepping onto the European stage. Built on the swampy banks of the Neva River, the construction of St. Petersburg was nothing short of a Herculean effort. It took tens of thousands of laborers, often conscripted serfs, working in brutal conditions. Many perished in the process, leading some to dub it a city built on bones. The human cost was staggering, but Peter was undeterred. He envisioned St. Petersburg as the face of a new Russia, with wide avenues, grand palaces, and a bustling port. This city was to be the jewel of the empire, a testament to Peter's vision of westernization. And boy, was it a gamble. The location was strategic for trade and military purposes, but it was also prone to flooding and bitterly cold winters. Comfort was sacrificed for the sake of grandeur. Peter's drive to reshape Russia wasn't limited to urban planning. He was on a mission to overhaul the military, too. After all, as Peter saw it, a modern state needed a modern army. Goodbye, old cavalry units. Hello, infantry trained in European tactics. He introduced conscription, which meant every noble had to provide a certain number of soldiers. The idea was to build a standing army that could hold its own against Europe's finest. By 1725, Russia's army had swelled to over 200,000 men, making it one of the largest in Europe. But Peter's reforms didn't stop at the barracks. He had a penchant for micromanagement that would make your modern-day helicopter parent blush. He implemented a table of ranks in 1722, a system that allowed anyone, regardless of noble birth, to climb the social ladder based on merit. This was revolutionary for a society where lineage was everything. In theory, a commoner could rise to the highest echelons of power, a tantalizing carrot dangled before the ambitious. Yet, not everyone was on board with Peter's grand vision. Many of his subjects were less than enthusiastic about being dragged into the modern age. Traditionalists grumbled about the erosion of Russian customs, and the Orthodox Church wasn't thrilled about Peter's interference in religious affairs. His reforms were disruptive, and resistance was inevitable. Yet, Peter was relentless, often enforcing his will with an iron fist. Those who opposed him faced imprisonment or worse. His methods were as ruthless as they were effective. Economically, Peter understood that a robust state needed a thriving economy. So, he pushed for industrialization, establishing factories and boosting iron production. By 1725, Russia was producing 20,000 tons of iron annually, making it a leading producer in Europe. He encouraged trade by opening up new ports and sought to reduce Russia's reliance on imports by fostering local industries. In short, Peter was a one-man economic revolution, determined to make Russia self-sufficient and competitive on the world stage. But let's not romanticize Peter's reign as a seamless transformation. His reforms came at a tremendous cost, both financially and in human suffering. The construction of St. Petersburg drained the treasury, and the constant wars he waged further strained resources. Many of his subjects bore the brunt of his ambitions, enduring heavy taxes and forced labor. For the average Russian peasant, Peter's modernization often meant little more than hardship. And yet, despite the discontent, Peter's legacy is undeniable. Under his rule, Russia emerged as a major European power, its influence stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Pacific Ocean. St. Petersburg became a symbol of Russia's new identity, a vibrant cultural and political hub that would endure long after Peter's death. His reforms laid the groundwork for the Russian Empire's expansion in the 18th and 19th centuries. Peter the Great was a man of contradictions, a visionary who could be both brutal and benevolent, a reformer who was unafraid to dismantle the status quo. His obsession with westernization was both his greatest strength and his most controversial legacy. He left behind a Russia that was forever changed, a nation caught between its rich traditions and the inexorable pull of the modern world. As we delve further into Peter's life and legacy, remember that history is never black and white. It's a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, conflict, and change, and Peter's story is a vivid illustration of how one man's relentless drive can alter the course of a nation. But as with any great story, there's always more to uncover, more to explore in the saga of Peter the Great. For now, let's leave him as the force of nature he was, shaping Russia with each bold stroke of his ambitious brush. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. As the dust settled on Peter's relentless drive to modernize Russia, the stage was set for one of the most audacious military endeavors in his reign, the Great Northern War. This wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a high-stakes gamble that would either propel Russia to greatness or plunge it into chaos. The opponent, none other than Sweden, led by the youthful but formidable Charles Roman XII. Now, if you're picturing a Scandinavian prince with a penchant for flat-pack furniture, think again. Charles was more like a Viking with a PhD in military strategy, and he wasn't about to roll over for a Russian upstart. In 1700, Peter launched his campaign with the confidence of a man who just aced a crash course in European warfare. He'd allied himself with Denmark-Norway and Saxony-Poland-Lithuania, forming a coalition aimed at curbing Sweden's dominance in the Baltic Sea. On paper, it seemed like a masterstroke. In practice, well, let's just say the opening moves were less checkmate and more oops. The first major battle at Narva was a calamity for Peter. His 35,000 strong army was trounced by a Swedish force less than half its size. The Russian troops, caught in a blizzard, were as cohesive as a cat herd, and Peter himself wasn't even on the scene. He was away gathering reinforcements. Talk about poor timing. The defeat was a stark reminder that ambition alone doesn't win wars. But Peter wasn't one to wallow in defeat. Instead, he picked up the pieces and went back to the drawing board. He realized he needed to rebuild his army from the ground up. And when I say rebuild, I mean he went full-on tycoon mode. By 1709, Russia had a revamped military machine, boasting over 200,000 soldiers with new artillery and tactics. It was an army befitting a modern state, and Peter was determined to test its mettle. Enter the Battle of Poltava, the turning point that would etch Peter's name into the annals of military history. In June 1709, the Russian and Swedish forces faced off near the town of Poltava in present-day Ukraine. Charles Roman XII, despite being wounded, led his troops with the kind of audacity that makes you question his sanity or his bravery, possibly both. However, Peter had learned from his past blunders. His army was fortified and well prepared, with strategic defensive positions and a robust supply line. The Swedes, on the other hand, were struggling with dwindling resources and fatigue. It was a classic case of overconfidence meeting its match. The battle itself was a brutal affair, a symphony of chaos and cannon fire. Peter's forces outnumbered the Swedes nearly 3-1, a fact that didn't bode well for Charles. As the smoke cleared, it was evident that the tide had turned. The Swedish army was decimated, and Charles fled with a handful of loyal followers. Poltava wasn't just a victory, it was a seismic shift in the balance of power in Northern Europe. Peter had pulled off what many thought impossible, turning the tables on a military powerhouse and etching Russia's name into the great power narrative. But let's not get carried away with the myth of Peter, the military genius. Sure, the guy had vision and tenacity, but luck played a starring role in this drama. The brutal Russian winters, which froze more than just the Swedes' morale, acted as an unintentional ally. Charles' Roman XII overambitious campaign stretched his forces thin, leaving them vulnerable. Meanwhile, Peter's strategic blunders, like underestimating the enemy and occasionally losing touch with reality, were glossed over by the allure of victory. Economically, the Great Northern War was a black hole absorbing resources faster than Peter could levitate his eyebrows. The war effort drained the treasury, prompting Peter to impose heavy taxes and conscription, turning every aspect of Russian life into a cog in the war machine. The economic strain was palpable, with inflation rising and the populace feeling the pinch. Yet Peter's iron will kept the wheels turning. He understood that the prize on the horizon, control of the Baltic Sea, was worth every ruble and every sacrifice. And what about the Swedish side of the tale? Charles Roman XII, despite his defeat, became an enigmatic figure, a symbol of defiance and daring in Swedish folklore. His escapades in the Ottoman Empire after Poltava, where he sought refuge and plotted his comeback, were the stuff of legend. Charles was the kind of leader who could inspire both awe and exasperation, a tragic hero whose ambition outpaced his resources. For Peter, the victory at Poltava was more than just a military triumph. It was the validation of his vision for Russia. The win secured Russia a seat at the European power table, transforming it from a peripheral player into a central figure in continental politics. The new Russian Empire, with its burgeoning navy and expanding territories, was a force to be reckoned with. But like any great story, the reality was more complicated than the legend. Peter's successes were built on a foundation of grit and determination, but also on the backs of countless soldiers and subjects who bore the brunt of his ambitions. So, as we press pause on Peter's military saga, let's remember that history isn't just about the glory of battles won or lost. It's about the human cost and the relentless drive of a ruler who refused to settle for anything less than greatness. Peter's tale is far from over. The lessons of his reign continue to echo through time. And as we prepare to dive into the final chapter of his story, one thing is certain. Peter the Great was a man who embraced the chaos of his times and emerged as a titan of history, for better or worse. Stay tuned as we unravel the final acts of this larger-than-life figure who dared to dream big and drag an entire nation along for the ride. As the final chapter of Peter the Great's life unfolds, we find a ruler still grappling with the relentless demands of empire building. Picture a man who never quite learned to coast. Peter was always at maximum throttle, even as his health began to falter. By the early 1720, he'd achieved what many thought impossible, transforming Russia from a sprawling medieval backwater into a formidable European powerhouse. But this transformation came at a cost that was more than just financial. It demanded a personal toll that would soon catch up with him. Peter's later years were marked by a flurry of reforms and projects, as if he knew time was slipping through his fingers. He established Russia's first secular schools, promoted the sciences, and even founded the Russian Academy of Sciences in 1724. These weren't mere vanity projects. They were Peter's attempts to ensure his legacy endured through knowledge and innovation. Yet, for all his forward thinking, Peter remained an absolute monarch, wielding power with an iron fist. His rule was as brutal as it was enlightened, a contradictory cocktail that left Russia both invigorated and exhausted. One of Peter's most enduring legacies was his ruthless approach to succession, a topic that often left him as perplexed as his courtiers. In 1718, he took the drastic step of executing his own son, Alexei, who was accused of conspiring against him. It was a move that sent shockwaves through Europe and cemented Peter's reputation as a ruler who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate any threat to his vision, even if it came from his own bloodline. The grim irony: Peter died without officially naming a successor, leaving a power vacuum that would make even the most dramatic soap operas blush. Peter's health was deteriorating rapidly by 1724. Years of relentless work, coupled with an unyielding lifestyle, had taken their toll. He suffered from a variety of ailments, including urinary tract problems that were exacerbated by his penchant for long military campaigns and his refusal to rest. In late 1724, after rescuing some soldiers from drowning in icy waters, Peter contracted a fever that would prove fatal. On January 28, 1725, Peter the Great, Russia's titan of transformation, breathed his last. The aftermath of Peter's death was as tumultuous as his life. With no clear heir, the Russian throne plunged into a period of uncertainty and intrigue, a fitting legacy for a ruler who thrived on chaos. Catherine I, Peter's second wife, was declared empress, but the power struggles that followed highlighted the instability Peter's reforms had inadvertently sown. You see, while Peter had dragged Russia into the modern age, the question remained: was Russia truly ready for the change he forced upon it? Peter left behind a nation divided. His westernization efforts had created a chasm between the progressive urban elite and the conservative rural populace. While the nobility and burgeoning middle class in cities like St. Petersburg enjoyed the fruits of modernization, the vast majority of Russians, peasants bound by serfdom, experienced little improvement in their lives. For them, Peter's reforms were a distant echo, drowned out by the daily grind of survival. Economically, Peter's reign was both a boon and a burden. His industrialization efforts laid the foundation for Russia's future economic power, but they also strained the treasury and increased the tax burden on the common folk. By the time of his death, Russia's national debt had ballooned, and the financial pressures on the peasantry were immense. The man who dreamt of a self-sufficient Russia left behind an economy that was far from stable. Politically, Peter's legacy was equally paradoxical. He was a modernizer who implemented progressive policies, like the table of ranks, that offered social mobility based on merit rather than birthright. Yet, he was also a tyrant who ruled with an authoritarian grip, suppressing dissent with brutal efficiency. His reforms centralized power in the hands of the monarchy, but they also sowed the seeds for future power struggles and revolutions. As history would show, Peter's reign was but the opening act in Russia's complex dance with modernity. His successors, including Catherine the Great, would build upon his legacy, navigating the treacherous waters of reform and tradition. Yet, the question Peter left unanswered, whether Russia was truly ready for the modern world, would haunt the nation for centuries. In the end, Peter the Great was a titan of contradictions, a visionary who could look beyond the horizon, yet a tyrant who left many in his wake. His reign was a testament to the power of ambition, the relentless drive to reshape a nation regardless of the cost. And while his dream of a modern Russia was realized, it was a dream built on the backs of those who had little choice but to follow. Peter's legacy is a reminder that the path to greatness is rarely straightforward, and that the echoes of ambition often linger long after the last cannonball has been fired. So, as we close the book on Peter the Great, let's remember that his story is more than just a tale of conquest and reform. It's a reflection on the complexities of leadership, the dual nature of progress, and the human cost of ambition. In the grand tapestry of history, Peter's thread is one of bold strokes and harsh realities, a fitting monument to a ruler who dared to dream and who dragged an entire nation along for the ride. The morning sun spills lazily over the vast expanse of the Deccan Plateau, warming the earth that's teeming with a wealth of iron ore just beneath its surface. You're not sipping on a modern-day cup of joe. Instead, you're gearing up for a day that revolves around one of the most transformative materials of ancient times, iron. It's roughly 1200 BCE, and here in ancient India, the planet's geography is your ally, and the rich veins of iron deposits are the hardest real estate in town. Forget Wi-Fi, this is the original network of connections, linking people through trade, technology, and a touch of alchemy. You're in a world where iron is the new black, and its allure is as irresistible as the latest smartphone release. Why? Because iron is changing the game, shaking up economies, and redefining what it means to be powerful. You're living in a society where the earth is not just an inert mass under your feet, but a treasure chest waiting to be unlocked. And guess what? You've got the key. The Deccan Plateau, a massive stretch of land covering 9 million square kilometers, is your stomping ground. It's not just dirt and rocks. It's a strategic gold mine, Well, iron mine, to be precise. This is where the magic happens, where the Earth's crust is a veritable buffet of hematite and magnetite, the iron ores that are your bread and butter. These deposits are thick and rich, and they spell economic prosperity for those who know how to wield them. As you grab your tools and head out, you're not just a craftsman, you're an economic force. Ironworking is labor-intensive and demands skill, but it's also the backbone of early Indian civilization's trade networks. The material's durability and versatility are driving forces behind its popularity. It's the steel of its time, shaping weapons, tools, and even the societal structures that depend on such advancements. Forget bronze. Iron is what's putting the gleam in the ancient eye. The allure of iron is multifaceted. For one, it's more abundant than tin and copper, which means economies can scale up without the constant worry of running out of raw materials. The irony. Bronze, which once held the crown, is now too expensive and too rare to keep up. You've got a hungry market, and iron's affordability and availability are closing the deal. The result is a booming trade network that stretches far and wide, from the Indus Valley to the far reaches of the subcontinent. Your day isn't just about hammering away in isolation. It's about connecting the dots, weaving a tapestry of economic and social interactions. Iron tools mean more efficient farming, which means more food, which means more people, which means more demand for tools, a perfect cycle of growth and prosperity. This isn't just a local affair. It's a continental game of chess, where the players are kings, traders, and craftsmen like you. Each piece of iron you craft is a move on this grand board, and every transaction is a step towards a more interconnected world. But let's not get too romantic about it. The reality is, metalworking is hard, sweaty work. You're on your feet all day, stoking fires, shaping iron, and dealing with the ever-present threat of burns and injuries. It's not exactly the glamorous life, but it's essential, and the rewards are tangible. You're paid not in coins or bills, but in goods, services, and sometimes even in kind, like food or shelter. It's a barter economy, and your skills are your currency. And as you work, you think about the broader implications of your labor. This isn't just about making tools and weapons. It's about creating stability and fostering innovation. With iron, civilizations can build stronger structures, defend themselves more effectively, and explore new territories. It's a catalyst for change, propelling societies forward and enabling them to thrive in ways that were previously unimaginable. As the sun arcs high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the plateau, you feel a sense of pride in your craft. You're not just shaping metal, you're shaping history. The iron in your hands is a testament to human ingenuity and resilience, a symbol of progress and possibility. It's a reminder that even in the harshest of conditions, creativity and determination can carve out a brighter future. The day wears on, and the air is thick with the sounds of hammering and the scent of burning charcoal, a testament to the relentless pursuit of advancement. You're part of a tradition that stretches back centuries, standing on the shoulders of those who came before you and paving the way for those who will follow. And as the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across the land, you take a moment to reflect on the impact of your work. In a world where resources are the currency of power, iron is the ace up your sleeve. It's the material that enables growth and development, the foundation upon which civilizations are built. Your work isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving, about creating a legacy that will endure long after you've laid down your tools. And as the day draws to a close, you know that tomorrow will bring new challenges and opportunities, new chances to shape the world with the power of iron. As the day wears on, the rhythmic clanging of hammers becomes your background score, a symphony of sweat and metal that echoes the relentless pursuit of progress. But let's zoom in a little, shall we? It's time to dive into the nitty-gritty, where the real magic, or should I say science, of ancient Indian metallurgy unfolds. Forget the glamorous myths for a second. We're talking about the real nuts and bolts, or rather the bellows and crucibles of the trade. First off, let's give props to the bellows. No, not the kind you use to stoke a cozy fireplace, but a robust, leather contraption that was the beating heart of any furnace worth its salt. Imagine a giant accordion, and you've got the gist. These bellows were essential for achieving the high temperatures necessary to melt iron ores. We're not talking about a mere 200 degrees Celsius oven here, folks. To turn solid rock into molten metal, you're looking at cranking the heat up to a blistering 538 degrees Celsius. That's harder than a summer on Mercury, and about as unforgiving. Now, the crucible. This isn't just a fancy word for a test of character, though believe me, working with one would certainly test yours. We're talking about a sturdy container made from clay or stone, designed to withstand the high temperatures of the smelting process. These little parts were the unsung heroes of the metallurgist's toolkit, holding the molten iron as impurities were burned away. Think of them as the original pressure cookers. Without them, you'd be stuck with a lump of impure rock rather than a gleaming ingot of iron. But here's where it gets really interesting. The process of smelting itself. It's not just a matter of throwing some ore in a fire and hoping for the best. No, this is a precise science. The ancient Indian smelters knew their chemistry, even if they didn't call it that. They understood that adding charcoal to the mix wasn't just for show. It was a crucial step in reducing the iron ore to pure iron. The carbon from the charcoal bonded with the oxygen in the ore, releasing carbon dioxide and leaving behind pure iron. It's the sort of elegant simplicity that would make even a modern chemist nod in approval. Speaking of chemistry, let's sideline to debunk a popular myth, the so-called mystical powers of Indian swords, like the legendary Wootz steel. These blades were reputed to cut through anything, including other swords. While that sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, the reality was even more impressive. The secret lay not in magic, but in metallurgy. By controlling the carbon content and cooling rate, ancient Indian blacksmiths produced a high-quality steel that was both hard and flexible. This wasn't sorcery. It was skill, honed over generations. Now, why all this focus on iron and steel? Because it was the backbone of ancient Indian society, the literal building blocks of power and prosperity. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't a utopia forged from metal. The demand for iron and steel fueled economic competition and social stratification. Those who mastered the craft held the keys to wealth and influence, while those who didn't were left in the metallic dust. Iron was more than just a resource. It was the currency of power, and the ability to shape it was a ticket to the top. Yet, amidst all this, the romance of the craft remains undeniable. The image of a blacksmith, hammer in hand, standing over a glowing forge, is as timeless as it is captivating. It's no wonder that myths and legends grew around the trade, weaving tales of magical swords and indestructible armor. And while the truth may lack the mysticism, it doesn't lack for awe. The real magic, if you will, was the human ingenuity that turned raw ore into objects of beauty and utility. So, as the sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows over your workshop, you pause to admire your handiwork. You're part of an age-old tradition, one that marries the scientific with the artistic, the practical with the fantastical. Your day might be filled with hard labor, but it's also a journey through history, one where every strike of the hammer writes a new chapter. In the end, it's this blend of myth and reality that makes the story of ancient Indian metallurgy so compelling. It's a testament to the human spirit, to our endless curiosity, and our relentless drive to shape the world around us. And as you hang up your tools, preparing for the challenges of tomorrow, you know that you're not just crafting metal, you're crafting history. Each piece you create is a link in the chain of progress, connecting the past to the future in ways that are both tangible and profound. So, as you hang up your tools, the clang of iron still ringing in your ears, let's pause a moment and turn the spotlight on you, the metalworker of ancient India. You're not just a cog in the machine, but the engine driving a whole lot of societal progress. Your role isn't just about brawn and sweat. It's about brains, skill, and a whole heap of economic savvy. In a world where iron is as precious as gold, you're the one holding the keys to the kingdom, or at least the keys to a very prosperous city-state. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of your life. You're part of a guild, a collective of like-minded artisans who govern the trade with an iron fist, pun intended. These guilds, known as Shreni, are not just about camaraderie and shared lunches. They wield serious clout, controlling everything from pricing to quality standards, and even lobbying for your rights. Think of them as the ancient world's answer to labor unions, only with more hammers and fewer picket signs. You've got the guild's backing, and that means protection from unfair competition and a say in the economic policies that affect your craft. Economically, you're sitting on a pretty solid rung of the social ladder. Metalworkers are the middle class of ancient India, not rolling in riches, but definitely more secure than your average farmer. The barter system means your skills are constantly translating into tangible goods, grain, livestock, or maybe even a little luxury, like a vibrant piece of cloth. You're not just surviving, you're thriving in a way that lets you send your kids to learn Sanskrit or maybe apprentice under a seasoned metalworker to carry on the family trade. Now, let's tackle a myth that's as stubborn as rust on iron. The idea that metalworking was a boys-only club. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Sure, the image of a burly blacksmith swinging a hammer is iconic, but dig a little deeper, and you'll find evidence of women wielding tools and making their mark. Inscriptions and ancient texts hint at women participating in, and sometimes even leading, metalworking operations. It's not as widespread as men, but it's happening, challenging the stereotype that women were only behind looms or in kitchens. In fact, ancient India was a bit ahead of its time in terms of gender roles, with women engaging in various trades and even enjoying property rights. Let's not get too carried away with the rosy picture, though. The reality is, gender dynamics were still complex and often skewed. Women in metalworking faced more barriers than their male counterparts, from societal expectations to physical challenges. But those who broke through were trailblazers, contributing to the craft with their ingenuity and skill. It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white, but rather a tapestry woven with threads of both constraint and opportunity. Speaking of opportunity, let's talk about the economic landscape you're navigating. Iron is more than just a useful metal. It's a linchpin in the trade networks crisscrossing the subcontinent. Your work isn't just influencing local markets. It's a vital link in a chain stretching from the Indus Valley to the far reaches of the Indian Ocean trade routes. The demand for iron tools and weapons fuels a bustling economy, where your craftsmanship is as sought after as the finest spices and silks. You're part of a booming industry, one that's shaping not just your village, but entire kingdoms. Now, here's where things get a little political. As a metalworker, you're indirectly involved in the power struggles of your time. Iron weapons are in high demand, and rulers are eager to arm their soldiers with the best tools of war. Your craft is integral to the ambitions of kings and generals, who rely on your skills to tip the scales in their favor. It's a precarious position, one that can bring both prosperity and peril, depending on the political winds. You're not just making swords, you're molding the fate of your society, whether you realize it or not. And while you're hammering away, don't forget the social implications of your work. Iron tools are revolutionizing agriculture, making farming more efficient and enabling populations to grow. More food means more people, which means more demand for every kind of craft, from pottery to textiles. You're not just a metal worker, you're a catalyst for societal growth, a key player in the complex dance of progress and innovation. But let's not romanticize it too much. Life as a metal worker is tough, physically demanding, and not without risks. Injuries are common, and the relentless heat of the forge is enough to make you question your career choices on a daily basis. Yet despite the hardships, there's a certain pride that comes with the territory. You're not just shaping metal, you're shaping the future, one red-hot ingot at a time. As midday approaches and the sun beats down with merciless intensity, you pause to wipe the sweat from your brow. You're part of an ancient tradition, one that blends artistry with practicality, myth with reality. You're a testament to human ingenuity and resilience, a symbol of progress in a world that's constantly evolving. And as you take a moment to reflect on your place in this grand tapestry of history, you know that you're not just living in the past. You're creating a legacy that will echo through the ages. In this world of iron and fire, your story is one of perseverance and possibility, a tale of how ordinary people shape extraordinary histories. As the day continues and the rhythm of the forge resumes, you're reminded that each piece you craft is a chapter in a much larger narrative, one that's still being written, one that will endure long after the last hammer has struck its final blow. As the rhythm of the forge resumes, let's pivot from the hot coals to the heart seats of power that shaped your world. While you were busy hammering away, the Mauryan and Gupta empires were busy crafting policies that would either make your job a whole lot easier or, well, a whole lot harder. These were not just any empires. They were the economic juggernauts of their day, with policies that rippled through the land like the Ganges in monsoon. First up, the Mauryan Empire, which kicked off around 322 BCE under Chandragupta Maurya. Here's a guy who didn't just want to rule, he wanted to streamline. His empire was like the ancient version of Silicon Valley, innovating and expanding at a breakneck pace. The Mauryans were big fans of centralized control, which meant they kept a close eye on everything, including the metal trade. State-controlled mining operations were the norm, ensuring that the empire had a steady stream of iron and other metals to arm their soldiers and build infrastructure. Chandragupta's grandson, Ashoka, took this a step further. Known for his conversion to Buddhism and those mighty rock edicts, Ashoka's reign also saw an increase in trade routes and infrastructure. Think of it as the world's first mega highway project. The Royal Road, stretching over 600 kilometers from Pataliputra to Taxila, was an iron-rich artery pumping trade and ideas across the subcontinent. Your iron tools and weapons. They were hitching a ride on this network, reaching markets as far-flung as Southeast Asia. But here's where the myth-busting kicks in. The Mauryan Empire wasn't some self-sufficient utopia. While the state did control key resources, it thrived on trade, both regional and international. The idea of the empire as an isolated giant is as much a fantasy as finding a Wi-Fi signal in the middle of the Deccan Plateau. Archaeological finds reveal Roman coins and Persian artifacts, proof that Mauryan India was well and truly plugged into a global network. So, while you might be pounding out iron, somewhere down the line, your work could end up in a Roman soldier's hand or a Persian merchant's stall. Fast forward a few centuries, and you've got the Gupta Empire doing its own thing, starting around 320 CE. Often dubbed the Golden Age of India, the Gupta period was like a Renaissance fair for intellectuals and artists. But it wasn't all about poetry and mathematics. The Guptas knew the value of a good trade policy. They were all about decentralization, allowing local rulers more autonomy while still benefiting from the empire's overarching stability. This meant that metalworkers like you could navigate a more flexible economic environment, striking deals directly with local rulers or merchants. The Guptas also understood the power of branding before it was cool. They promoted themselves as the cultural and economic hub of the world, attracting scholars, traders, and artisans to their courts. Imagine the buzz at the time, everyone from astronomers to blacksmiths flocking to Gupta cities, turning them into bustling centers of innovation and commerce. Your iron goods were part of this vibrant tapestry, traded alongside silk, spices, and the occasional philosophical manuscript. But here's another reality check. The Gupta Empire, too, leaned heavily on trade. It wasn't an island of prosperity. Instead, it was more like a busy port city, with trade routes stretching from the Roman Empire in the west to China in the east. The Silk Roads were humming with activity, and your iron tools were not just making farms more efficient, but also finding their way into distant lands, carried by traders seeking profit and adventure. Now, let's debunk another romantic notion, that of the autarkic or self-reliant empires. It's tempting to envision these empires as self-sustaining giants, but the truth is, they were more like intricate spider webs of trade and diplomacy. They relied on complex trade networks to import and export goods, from spices to silk to, you guessed it, metal. This wasn't just about economic survival, it was also about political influence. Control the trade routes, and you control the flow of wealth and power. And let's not forget the role of guilds, or shrenis, in this economic dance. These guilds were pivotal in shaping trade policies, negotiating with local rulers, and even influencing imperial decisions. As a member of a metalworking guild, you weren't just a passive player. You were actively shaping your empire's economic policies. It's a bit like being a shareholder in a multinational corporation, except with fewer PowerPoint presentations and more hammers. In the grand chessboard of ancient India, your role was both a pawn and a kingmaker. The iron you crafted was more than just a resource. It was a tool of diplomacy, a currency of power, and a catalyst for change. You were a part of an ecosystem where politics and trade were as intertwined as the threads of a silk sari. Every piece of metal you shaped was a move in the complex game of empire building. So, as the afternoon sun casts long shadows over the bustling trade routes and the distant clamor of distant markets reaches your ears, take a moment to appreciate your place in this grand narrative. You're not just a metal worker. You're a key player in a story that spans continents and centuries, a tale of trade and politics, of myths and realities. And as the day draws to a close, know that you're not just shaping metal, you're forging history, one iron ingot at a time. As the sun dips below the horizon and you wipe the last smudge of soot from your brow, let's take a moment to connect past to present. Ancient Indian metalwork wasn't just about clanging hammers and glowing forges. It was the bedrock for a technological revolution that echoes even today. You see, those early craftsmen were the Steve Jobs of their time. Only instead of iPhones, they were crafting the forerunners of modern metallurgy. First up, let's talk Damascus steel. Picture a blade that could slice through silk midair. Legend has it that this steel could even cut through a rival sword without so much as a scratch. But before you start conjuring images of magical blacksmiths in wizard hats, let's ground this in reality. The secret lay in high-carbon wootz steel, first produced in the Tamil regions around 300 BCE. This wasn't Hogwarts. It was high science, involving precise control of carbon content and cooling rates to create a unique microstructure. That's right. Those ancient smiths were pulling off what modern metallurgists call thermodynamic phase transformations, all by eye and feel. Now, you might wonder, how does that connect to today? Well, the principles of carbon manipulation in wootz steel are the grandities of modern metallurgical processes like tempering and alloying. Your car's engine block. It owes a debt to these ancient techniques. The stainless steel in your kitchen, a direct descendant of those early high-carbon concoctions. In a way, every time you slice a tomato with your stainless steel knife, you're channeling a bit of ancient Indian genius. Let's not forget the economic engine that this metalworking prowess powered. With iron and steel as the backbone, ancient India wasn't just a land of spiritual gurus and spice traders. It was a formidable player on the global stage. Trade routes facilitated by iron tools and weapons extended as far as the Roman Empire and China. The Mauryan and Gupta empires didn't just wield swords, they wielded influence, with iron as their currency of power. It's like the original global supply chain, minus the shipping containers. But here's a twist. While iron was the powerhouse, it was also a democratizer. The affordability and abundance of iron meant that its benefits trickled down, not just hoarded by the elite. Farmers wielded stronger plows, artisans crafted more durable tools, and even the average Joe, or Jai, could aspire to own a decent set of cutlery. It's a bit like the tech boom of the '90s, where suddenly everyone had a PC. Iron wasn't just a resource, it was a societal game changer. However, let's not get too starry-eyed. The production of these materials wasn't all roses. The environmental toll of iron production was significant, with deforestation for charcoal being a major issue. The air around those ancient furnaces, probably less forest fresh and more industrial revolution chic. It's a stark reminder that every technological leap comes with its own set of trade-offs, a lesson that resonates today as we grapple with the environmental impacts of our own industrial pursuits. And what about those myths? The mystical aura surrounding Indian metallurgy has its charm, but the real magic was human ingenuity. The ability to transform raw earth into something more, tools, weapons, infrastructure, was nothing short of extraordinary. It's a testament to human resilience and creativity, a reminder that behind every legend is a human story of trial, error, and eventual triumph. As you hang up your tools and settle in for the night, consider this. The work you did today was not just a day's labor. It was a contribution to a legacy that stretches across millennia. Those ancient innovations didn't just stay in the past. They rippled forward, influencing cultures and technologies around the globe. You're part of a chain of progress that links the iron of the past to the steel of the future. So, as you drift off to sleep, let the echoes of hammer strikes and the glow of the forge lull you into a deeper understanding. You're not just a footnote in history. You're part of a grand narrative that continues to shape the world. The legacy of ancient Indian metalworking is as robust as the iron it forged, transformative, enduring, and undeniably human. Here's to the past, and to the future, it continues to inspire. A long time ago, in a land where ice and fjords were as common as overpriced lattes in a hipster cafe, the Norse gods were busy running their own version of a celestial soap opera. We're talking about a pantheon that could give any reality TV show a run for its money. The Norse gods didn't just appear out of the misty void of Scandinavia. They were sculpted by the harsh conditions of their environment and the gritty realities of the Viking Age, a time when the weather was as icy as a jilted lover's stare, and survival required more than just a cozy fireplace and a Netflix subscription. Now, before we dive headlong into the tangled web of celestial drama, let's set the scene. Picture the Viking Age, roughly spanning from 793 to 1066 AD. It was a time when longships sliced through the icy waters faster than a modern-day speedboat, and the Norsemen sailed farther than you'd expect from a society without GPS. These were people who believed in gods that reflected their ambitions, fears, and the brutal reality of their world. A place where winter could last half the year, and a good day was one where you didn't freeze to death or get raided by the neighbors. The Norse pantheon was led by the Aesir, a group of deities with Odin, the one-eyed king, at the helm. Now, Odin wasn't your run-of-the-mill deity. He was as complex as a Rubik's Cube in a blender. Known for wisdom and war, he sacrificed an eye at the Well of Mimir for knowledge. That's commitment, folks. His wife, Frigg, was the ultimate multitasker, the goddess of love, fertility, and fate, kind of like an ancient Scandinavian version of a life coach. Then there's Thor, the hammer-wielding god of thunder, who could be summed up as the original action hero. Thor was the kind of guy you'd want on your side in a bar fight. His trusty hammer, Mjolnir, was the Norse equivalent of an all-access pass to victory. It was said that he could crush mountains with it, which probably wasn't great for property values. But let's not forget Loki, the trickster god with a family tree that would make a genealogist's head explode. Loki was the kind of character who would RSVP to your party just to show up and unleash chaos. He was known for his cunning and shape-shifting abilities, which made him about as trustworthy as a politician during election season. His children included a giant wolf, Fenrir, the world serpent, Jörmungandr, and Hel, the ruler of the underworld. Loki's family reunions must have been a blast. The origins of these myths can be traced back to the harsh Scandinavian landscape and the socio-political climate of the time. The Norsemen lived in a world where the weather was unforgiving and resources were as scarce as hen's teeth. Their gods weren't just mythological figures. They were embodiments of the forces of nature and human experiences. The gods' stories were as much about survival and resilience as they were about epic battles and romantic entanglements. In this world, the gods were the ultimate influencers, dictating not just the weather, but the very fabric of the Viking way of life. They were consulted for everything from the outcome of battles to the fertility of crops. Their stories were passed down orally, a rich tapestry woven into the very culture of the Norse people. These tales were eventually written down in texts like the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, providing us with a window into a world where the line between the divine and mortal was as blurry as a drunk's vision at a feast. The socio-political backdrop of the Viking Age was one of exploration and expansion. Norsemen weren't just raiders. They were traders and settlers, reaching as far as Greenland and possibly even North America long before Columbus stumbled upon the New World. They were governed by chieftains and kings, whose power was often as fragile as a soap bubble, dependent on their ability to lead successful raids and maintain loyalty among their warriors. So, why does any of this matter? Well, understanding the Norse gods and their stories isn't just about memorizing names and exploits. It's about grasping how these myths reflected the values, fears, and aspirations of an entire civilization. In the same way that today's memes capture cultural zeitgeists, these stories encapsulated the essence of the Viking Age, a time when life was as unpredictable as Loki's next move. As we dive deeper into the saga of the Norse gods, keep in mind that these deities were more than just ancient mythological superstars. They were reflections of the Norse people's relationship with their environment, their neighbors, and their own humanity. So, buckle up, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. And in the world of Norse mythology, icebergs are just the beginning. But hold onto your horned helmets, because the daily grind of your average Viking wasn't all about pillaging and plundering. Sure, the Hollywood version of Vikings is all about raiding parties and reckless adventuring, but the truth is, when they weren't out painting the town, or an unsuspecting monastery, Vikings were industrious farmers, traders, and craftsmen. Yes, you heard that right. When they weren't wielding swords, they were more likely to be found wielding plows or haggling in a market. You see, the Norse gods not only inspired their epic tales of valor, but also acted as guides for the more mundane aspects of Viking life. Take Freyr, for example, the god of fertility, prosperity, and sunshine. He was practically the Norse version of a motivational poster in every farmhouse, reminding folks that a good harvest wasn't just a matter of hard work, but also divine favor. The irony. In a land where winter lasted longer than a modern TV series, a little sunshine was something you had to genuinely pray for. Now, let's tackle the myth of the Viking raids. Contrary to popular belief, these weren't just mindless acts of aggression. Nope, they were often highly strategic, almost like a medieval version of corporate takeovers. The first recorded Viking raid on Lindisfarne in 793 AD wasn't just a smash and grab. It was a calculated decision. The island was a wealthy monastery, flush with treasures and relatively undefended. Charging. Think of it as an early form of venture capitalism, minus the PowerPoint presentations and stock options. The economics of Viking raids were surprisingly sophisticated. They weren't just after gold and silver. They were in the market for slaves, too. Slaves were a valuable commodity back in the day, and Norsemen were nothing if not pragmatic. In fact, the word slave itself is derived from Slav, due to the number of Slavic people captured and traded by Vikings. As grim as that sounds, it's a testament to the harsh realities of the time. And what about Thor, the hammer-wielding god of thunder? Sure, he's the poster boy for biceps and bravery, but his role was more nuanced than single-handedly starring in Asgardian action flicks. Thor symbolized protection and was the go-to deity for any Viking looking to safeguard their home and hearth. Given that Viking villages were often just a raid away from being reduced to ashes, having a god like Thor on your side was as crucial as having a good insurance policy today. Plus, Mjolnir, his trusty hammer, wasn't just an oversized mallet. It was a symbol worn by many Vikings as a talisman, a divine stamp of approval for their deeds, and a promise of safety. But let's not overlook the Norse gods' influence on warfare, a domain where they were nothing short of celestial generals. Odin, the All-Father, was revered not just for his wisdom, but also as a god of war. Warriors would dedicate their battles to him, hoping to earn a place in Valhalla, the warrior's paradise. It's like a cosmic retirement plan, where the benefits included endless feasting and fighting, because apparently that's heaven to a Viking. However, the road to Valhalla wasn't paved with gold. It was paved with the blood, sweat, and tears of an unforgiving lifestyle. The Norsemen were seafarers, voyaging across treacherous oceans in longships that were marvels of engineering for their time. These sleek vessels, equipped with shallow drafts, were capable of navigating both the open sea and shallow rivers, allowing the Vikings to strike swiftly and vanish just as quickly. The practical design of these ships was as much a part of their success as the fierce warriors they carried. Yet, for all the sword-swinging and ship-sailing, the Viking Age was also a period of significant trade and cultural exchange. Norsemen established trade routes that reached as far as the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate. These weren't just marauders, they were merchants, exchanging goods like furs, walrus ivory, and slaves for silver, silk, and spices. This bustling trade network was a lifeline for the Vikings, sustaining their communities and enriching their culture. The Norse pantheon, then, wasn't just a collection of stories about oversized personalities duking it out in the sky. It was a reflection of the everyday challenges, hopes, and fears of a people carving out their existence in a harsh world. From the way they farmed to the way they fought, the gods were woven into the very fabric of Viking life. They were the original multitaskers, gods whose stories doubled as survival guides. So, while the image of Vikings as mead-swilling marauders is undeniably appealing, it's only one side of the story. Their gods and myths were as much about managing the day-to-day grind as they were about inspiring legendary feats. And in understanding that, we get a clearer picture of a society that was as dynamic as it was daring. A society that, for all its sword-swinging swagger, was as deeply rooted in the soil as it was in the sea. As we continue to unravel the saga of the Norse gods and the Viking Age, remember, these weren't just tales of thunderous exploits. They were blueprints for survival in a world where the gods were as unpredictable as the weather. And if there's one thing the Vikings understood, it was that sometimes the best way to weather a storm is to embrace it. But hey, Even the Vikings knew that if you're going to navigate a world with gods as unpredictable as their weather, you'd better have a solid backup plan. And boy, did they. Let's talk economics, the real engine behind those iconic Viking longships. While modern depictions might suggest they spent all their time plundering, the Vikings were, in fact, the Elon Musks of their day, minus the tweets and the space rockets. They were savvy traders, explorers, and settlers who helped knit together a global trade network that stretched from the frigid waters of the North Atlantic to the sun-baked sands of Baghdad. Now, before you start envisioning Vikings in business suits, let's set the scene. We're talking about a time when a good trade route could make or break a community. Picture the bustling markets of Birka in Sweden or Hedeby in Denmark, where Norse traders bartered everything from amber and walrus ivory to slaves. Yes, even the Vikings had their dark side, and the trade in human lives was as much a part of their economy as any other goods. And let's not forget the silver. Ah, the shiny stuff that kept the wheels of commerce turning. Vikings were obsessed with it, and they acquired it through trade, raids, and tribute. A bit of a mixed bag, really. So, what was the economic underbelly of this trade behemoth? Well, the Norsemen were masters of supply and demand before it was cool. They understood that controlling key trade routes was as vital as the goods themselves. This is why they set up shop in strategic locations like Dublin, York, and even Kiev, turning these outposts into thriving centers of commerce. And while raiding was certainly a part of their repertoire, it was only half the story. Trading was just as important, if not more so, for establishing their presence in foreign lands. Now, let's shift gears to the political landscape. Viking society was a bit of a mixed bag here as well, with chieftains and kings wielding power that was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Their authority came from their ability to lead successful raids and command loyalty among their warriors. It was a meritocracy of sorts, where strength and cunning were the keys to the kingdom. But it wasn't all testosterone-fueled sword-swinging. The Norse had their own version of democracy, with assemblies called things, where free men could gather to air grievances and make decisions. Think of it as a town hall meeting with more axes and less polite discourse. The Viking Age was also a time of significant exploration, which played a crucial role in spreading Norse mythology. They weren't just content with their own backyard. They were the original globetrotters, eager to see what lay beyond the horizon. And as they sailed to new lands, they took their guards with them, spreading tales of Odin's wisdom and Thor's strength. This wasn't just about storytelling. It was a way of establishing cultural influence. When you're trying to make a name for yourself, nothing says, "We're here to stay," quite like introducing your guards to the locals. But let's not forget the role of branding. The Vikings were pioneers of PR, crafting an image that has endured for centuries. The myth of the fearsome Viking warrior wasn't just about intimidation. It was a calculated move to ensure that their enemies thought twice before challenging them. This was a time when reputation was everything, and the Norse knew how to play the game. They understood that a well-timed tale of Viking ferocity could be as effective as a fleet of longships on the horizon. In this way, the Norse gods weren't just spiritual figures. They were part of a larger narrative that helped cement the Vikings' place in history. And speaking of narratives, let's tackle the myth of the Vikings as mere barbarians. Sure, they had a penchant for raiding, but they also had a sophisticated understanding of the world around them. They navigated by the stars, understood the currents, and even had a rudimentary form of meteorology. They weren't just swinging swords, they were crafting a legacy. Their sagas and eddas weren't just entertainment, they were records of their exploits, a way to immortalize their place in the world. Let's touch on the cultural exchanges that occurred as a result of this extensive trade network. You see, the Vikings weren't just exporting their guards and goods, they were also importing new ideas and technologies. From the Islamic world, they brought back knowledge of astronomy and medicine, while their contact with the Byzantine Empire introduced them to new forms of art and architecture. The Vikings were a conduit for exchange, absorbing and adapting what they learned from other cultures. This wasn't just a one-way street. It was a highway of influence that flowed both ways. So, as we continue to explore the intricacies of Viking society, remember that the Norse gods were more than just mythological figures. They were part of a larger tapestry that wove together the economic, political, and cultural threads of the Viking Age. From their strategic trade outposts to their political assemblies and epic voyages, the Vikings were a force to be reckoned with. They understood the power of storytelling, not just as a means of preserving their history, but as a way of shaping their future. In the end, the Vikings were both myth-makers and mythbusters, crafting a legacy that endures to this day. They were warriors and traders, explorers and settlers, storytellers and innovators. And as we dive deeper into their world, we'll continue to unravel the stories of the Norse gods and the people who worshipped them, revealing a society that was as complex and dynamic as the legends it left behind. So, stay tuned, because the saga is far from over, and there's plenty more to discover about the Vikings, their gods, and the world they shaped. And so, as we sail deeper into the Norse saga, let's talk about what happened when these hammer-wielding seafarers met the cross-bearing Christians. Picture it, the ultimate culture clash, like a medieval mashup of rock and classical music, with all the awkwardness of a first date where neither party speaks the other's language. As the Viking Age drew to a close around the late 11th century, the Norse way of life began to undergo a seismic shift, influenced by the encroaching tide of Christianity. It wasn't just a religious conversion. It was a cultural transformation that would leave both sides irrevocably changed. Now, before you imagine Viking chieftains swapping their axes for Bibles overnight, let's set the stage. The conversion to Christianity wasn't a single event, but a slow-burning saga that played out over centuries. Initially, Christian missionaries found the Norse as receptive as a rock terrain. At first, conversion was less about faith and more of a savvy political move, akin to updating your LinkedIn profile to include trending skills. The first major wave hit in the 10th century, when King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark, noted for his penchant for unifying the Danes and lending his name to your wireless technology, declared himself a Christian. Like a medieval influencer, his conversion wasn't just personal. It was a signal to others that aligning with the Christian world could bring new alliances and economic benefits. And there it was, the economic underbelly of a spiritual decision. The Christian world promised not just salvation, but access to continental trade networks and the protection of powerful monarchs. For the Norse, who were always on the lookout for the next big opportunity, this was as tempting as a dragon's hoard. By the turn of the millennium, many chieftains across Scandinavia saw the appeal of these benefits, even if it meant giving up the raucous revelries of the old guards for the solemnity of church services. But hold on, because this wasn't a clean break. The Norse didn't just toss out their guards like last season's fashion. Instead, they engaged in a bit of divine remixing. You see, the transition from Odin to the Almighty wasn't an overnight transformation. It was more like a cultural potluck, where old and new beliefs mingled like awkward guests at a dinner party. When Christianity knocked at the door, Norse mythology didn't just roll over and die. It adapted. Many Viking Age monuments show carvings of both crosses and Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, side by side. It's as if they were hedging their bets, keeping a foot in both worlds. After all, why settle for one set of divine allies when you could have a whole pantheon? This blend of beliefs led to some fascinating syncretism, where Norse legends intertwined with Christian symbolism. Take, for example, the story of Ragnarok, the Norse apocalypse. Some scholars suggest that its themes of death and rebirth may have resonated with Christian eschatology, where the end of the world is followed by a new heaven and earth. It's like swapping out Loki's fire and brimstone for the Book of Revelations, with a little extra Viking flair. And speaking of flair, let's not overlook the practicalities of this cultural exchange. The conversion to Christianity also meant adopting new social norms and laws, as church leaders sought to impose their moral codes on the Norse. This wasn't just about going to church on Sundays. It was a shift in societal structures. The church introduced concepts like marriage as a sacrament, which was a stark departure from previous Norse customs, where marriages were often more like business transactions, sealed with a hearty handshake and a promise of mutual benefit. Yet, as the Norse navigated this new religious landscape, they managed to retain elements of their old culture. The sagas and Eddas, those epic tales of gods and heroes, were written down during this period, often by Christian monks. It was as if the monks recognized the cultural value of these stories and sought to preserve them, perhaps sensing that they were chronicling the last whispers of a fading era. These texts are a testament to the resilience of a culture that, even as it changed, refused to be entirely subsumed. But let's not romanticize this too much. The conversion brought its own set of challenges and conflicts. Not everyone was thrilled about the new faith, and resistance was as fierce as a berserker in battle. There were uprisings and rebellions, most famously in Iceland, where the Althing, the island's grand assembly, ultimately decreed that the nation would convert to Christianity around the year 1000. It was a pragmatic decision to avoid civil war, but it didn't stop some from continuing to worship the old gods in secret, a quiet act of defiance against the new order. This period of transition also saw the rise of new power dynamics, as church officials began to wield influence over kings and chieftains. The balance shifted from warrior might to ecclesiastical authority, and the church's reach extended into every corner of life. Monasteries became centers of learning and culture, preserving knowledge that might have otherwise been lost in the tumult of the age. They were the medieval equivalents of data centers, storing not just religious texts, but also the accumulated wisdom of the ancient world. Yet, for all its transformative power, the spread of Christianity wasn't just about top-down decrees and political maneuvering. It was a grassroots evolution, as ordinary people began to integrate new beliefs into their daily lives. Slowly, the old gods faded into legend, their stories lingering like echoes in the fjords, while the new faith took root in the hearts of the people. The Norse gods may have lost their temples, but they found a new home in the tales that would be passed down through generations, a reminder of a time when the line between divine and human was as blurred as the northern horizon. As we wrap up this chapter of cultural convergence, remember that this wasn't the end of the Norse story. It was merely a turning point, a moment when old and new collided to form something entirely unique. The Norse may have traded their gods for a new faith, but in doing so, they created a legacy that endures to this day, a testament to the power of cultural exchange and the resilience of human belief. So, stick around, because the saga continues, and there are still plenty of stories left to uncover as we journey further into the world of the Vikings and their enduring myths. As the Norse gods slipped from the pages of history into the annals of myth, they left behind a legacy as enduring as Thor's mighty hammer. Fast forward to today, where these ancient tales have been resurrected in places as diverse as Marvel's cinematic universe and the throbbing riffs of heavy metal music. It's as if the gods traded their mead halls for multiplexes and marsh pits. But why have these stories stuck around like a catchy chorus in a rock anthem? Why do Thor and Loki continue to capture imaginations long after their temples crumbled into the dust of history? First, let's talk about our old friend Thor, who has undergone something of a Hollywood glow-up. He's gone from being a deity with a penchant for smashing giants to a superhero played by an Australian heartthrob with abs that could rival any Norse gods. In the Marvel movies, Thor is a blend of brawn, bravado, and a surprisingly sharp sense of humor. And while the cinematic version is a far cry from the original, it taps into the same vein of heroism and strength that made Thor a beloved figure in Norse mythology. It's a testament to the enduring appeal of the hero archetype, a narrative that resonates whether you're in a Viking longhouse or a modern movie theater. But it's not just the silver screen where Norse mythology finds new life. Heavy metal bands have long been enamored with the raw power and drama of the myths. Bands like Amon Amarth and Enslaved have crafted entire albums around tales of gods and warriors, their music echoing the thunderous might of Odin and his ilk. It's not hard to see why these stories resonate with musicians drawn to themes of rebellion, strength, and epic battles. Norse mythology offers a rich tapestry of drama and conflict, perfect for headbanging anthems that stir the soul and quicken the pulse. Yet, beyond the glitz of Hollywood and the grit of heavy metal, these myths persist because they speak to something fundamentally human. They explore themes of courage, betrayal, fate, and the struggle against insurmountable odds. Odin's quest for wisdom, Thor's battles against chaos, and Loki's trickery all reflect the complexities of human nature. These stories offer a mirror to our own lives, a reminder that the challenges we face are as old as time itself. They tell us that no matter how advanced our technology becomes, the core human experience remains remarkably unchanged. In a world where technology evolves faster than you can say Ragnarok, these ancient tales remind us of our roots. The Vikings, with their seafaring adventures and fierce independence, symbolize a freedom that many still yearn for today. Their myths encapsulate a world where the line between the divine and the mortal was as thin as a hair's breadth, a world where gods walked among men and destiny was as mutable as the ocean's tide. However, let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The Viking Age was no fairy tale. It was a time of harsh realities, where survival depended on raiding as much as trading, and the gods were invoked as often for war as for peace. For every tale of valor, there was the stark reality of a brutal existence, where winters were long and resources scarce. The gods reflected this duality, embodying both the aspirations and the anxieties of their worshippers. The Norse myths, then, are a blend of romance and reality, a duality that continues to captivate us. They offer escapism and empowerment, a way to explore the depths of human emotion and the heights of heroism. And in a world where uncertainty is the only certainty, these stories provide a sense of continuity, a connection to the past that is both comforting and inspiring. In exploring why these myths endure, we stumble upon a profound truth about human nature. We are, at our core, storytellers. We use narratives to make sense of the world, to find meaning in chaos, and to connect with one another. Norse mythology, with its larger-than-life characters and epic tales, taps into this primal need. It's a reminder that while the world may change, the stories we tell remain a constant thread, weaving through time and space to bind us together. As we wrap up our journey through the realms of Norse mythology, let's take a moment to reflect on what these stories have taught us. They've shown us the power of resilience, the importance of wisdom, and the need for courage in the face of adversity. They've reminded us that the line between hero and villain is often blurred, and that even gods are not immune to the whims of fate. In the end, these myths are more than just tales of gods and monsters. They are reflections of our own hopes, fears, and dreams. So, as you lay down your horned helmet and settle in for the night, remember that the saga of the Norse gods is far from over. It lives on in the stories we tell, the music we create, and the movies we watch. It endures in the hearts of those who seek adventure, who yearn for freedom, and who understand that sometimes the greatest journeys are the ones we take within ourselves. And who knows? Perhaps, as the northern lights dance across the sky, the gods themselves are watching, their laughter carried on the wind, delighting in the knowledge that their legacy is alive and well in the world they once ruled. Deep in the heart of Central America, where the air hangs thick like a damp velvet curtain, the Maya civilization took root. Now, setting up a thriving society in a rainforest might sound like a fool's errand, like trying to host a barbecue in a hurricane. But the Maya were nothing if not resourceful. They turned the very challenges of their environment into advantages, pulling off a feat that would make even the most determined DIYer nod in appreciation. Let's get one thing straight. The Maya weren't just plopping down huts in a jungle clearing and calling it a day. Oh no, they were building cities, massive, impressive, and downright awe-inspiring cities. But first they had to contend with the dense jungles and the limestone-rich terrain of the Yucatan Peninsula. This was a place where the ground could chew up and spit out your best-laid plans. The limestone, with its Swiss cheese-like quality, was both a boon and a bane. It made for excellent building material, sure, but it also meant that water drainage was a nightmare. Rain would just disappear into the ground faster than a paycheck at a sharping spree, leaving the Maya to figure out how to capture and store water for those pesky dry seasons. And let's talk about those jungles, nature's own version of an obstacle course, complete with thick canopies, venomous critters, and a humidity level that makes you wonder if you're swimming or walking. But the Maya were no strangers to ingenuity. They didn't just survive in the rainforest, they thrived. They cleared patches of forest with slash-and-burn agriculture, a method that might make modern environmentalists cringe, but was about as effective as it got back then. This technique fertilized the soil, creating productive farmland where there had once been tangled wilderness. So why on earth would the Maya choose such a challenging landscape? Well, it wasn't all bad news. The rainforest was a treasure trove of resources, hardwoods for building, plants for medicine, and a bounty of wildlife that made for excellent dining. The dense vegetation also provided a natural defense barrier, not just against invaders, but against the less-than-friendly climate as well. And let's not forget the limestone. It wasn't just a construction material. It was the canvas upon which they built their cities and monuments, like the grand pyramids of Tikal and Kapan. But if you think that the Maya were just bumbling around in the jungle, think again. They were astronomically advanced, using their impressive knowledge to guide agricultural cycles and religious rituals. With no Wi-Fi to check the weather, they relied on keen observations of the stars and planets, making them the original sky watchers. This celestial knowledge was crucial, as it dictated everything from when to plant corn to when to hold their famous ball games, an activity that was part sport, part religious ceremony, and entirely about proving who ruled the roost. Now, don't be fooled into thinking this was some kind of peaceful utopia nestled in the trees. The reality was much more Game of Thrones than Fern Gully. Each city-state was its own kingdom, complete with rulers, warriors, and the occasional knock-down, drag-out war. The competition for resources, power, and prestige was as fierce as a jaguar on the hunt, and alliances shifted as quickly as the jungle weather. Yet, through it all, the Maya built a civilization that was as sophisticated as it was resilient. In the end, the Maya turned their challenging environment into the foundation of their success. The rainforest was their home, their fortress, and their provider. It was a place where they could hide from their enemies, plant their crops, and build their pyramids up to the sky. And while the limestone terrain might have made water management a tricky business, it also gave them the tools to construct cities that would stand the test of time. So, the next time you find yourself grumbling about spotty Wi-Fi or a leaky roof, spare a thought for the Maya. They not only survived, but thrived in a world that was as merciless as it was beautiful. They saw the potential in their environment's challenges and turned them into opportunities, leaving a legacy that continues to capture our imagination centuries later. So, the next time you find yourself grumbling about spotty Wi-Fi or a leaky roof, spare a thought for the Maya. They not only survived, but thrived in a world that was as merciless as it was beautiful. They saw the potential in their environment's challenges and turned them into opportunities, leaving a legacy that continues to capture our imagination centuries later. Now, let's dive into the political theater of the Maya world, a place where city-states acted like feuding siblings, always ready for a tussle over power, prestige, or just the last piece of metaphorical cake. Imagine Hollywood drama, but with less bardocks and more obsidian daggers. The Maya civilization was not a single unified empire like the Romans or the Egyptians. Oh no, it was a collection of fiercely independent city-states, each ruled by its own king or queen, a Kayuhal Ajor, if you want to impress at your next trivia night. Picture these city-states as kingdoms in their own right, complete with their own capitals, territories, and armies. Think Tikal, Kapan, and Palenque, each trying to outdo the other in a grand game of one-upmanship. They were like the Kardashians of the ancient world, but with more stone architecture and less reality TV. These city-states formed alliances, waged wars, and engaged in trade, all while trying to ensure their lineage was the hardest ticket in town. And speaking of alliances, let's talk about the bloodier side of Maya diplomacy. Marriages were less about love and more about strategic alliances, with royal offspring often shipped off to far-off courts as living peace treaties. It was like a medieval version of Tinder, only with more at stake than just a bad date. And when marriage didn't work, there was always good old-fashioned warfare. The Maya were no strangers to a good scrap, and battles were as much about displaying power as they were about winning territory. Imagine a chess game where losing a pawn might mean losing your head, literally. But how did they keep this complex society ticking without the modern-day convenience of spreadsheets and Google Calendar into the infamous Maya calendar system? Forget your run-of-the-mill Gregorian calendar. The Maya had not one, but 3 calendars running simultaneously. You've got the Tzolk'in, a 260-day ceremonial calendar, the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar, and the Long Count, which tracked longer periods of time and was the one everyone got jumpy about in 2012. Each of these calendars interlocked like gears in a cosmic clock, guiding everything from agricultural events to religious festivals. The Maya calendar was their social media feed, news ticker, and event planner all rolled into one. And while we're on the topic of agriculture, let's dig, pun totally intended, into the economic heart of the Maya civilization. Agriculture was the backbone of their economy, with maize being the superstar crop. Corn wasn't just food, it was life. The Maya believed humans were made from corn, which makes carb loading practically a religious experience. But they didn't stop there. They grew beans, squash, and cacao, the latter being the source of chocolate, the true nectar of the gods. Forget gold. Cacao beans were the real currency, a fact that makes you wonder why Willy Wonka wasn't a Maya king. Trade was the lifeblood of the Maya, linking city-states and creating a network that spanned from the highlands of Guatemala to the Yucatan coast. They traded jade, obsidian, feathers, and pottery, using rivers as their highways and well-trodden paths through the jungle as their trade routes. Imagine a bustling marketplace without the haggling over Wi-Fi hotspots. Instead, you'd have merchants negotiating over a particularly fine piece of turquoise or a vibrant Quetzal feather. But let's not sugarcoat it. Maya society wasn't all pyramids and chocolate. It was a hierarchical society, with kings and nobles living a life of luxury atop their stone palaces while the common folk toiled in the fields. The peasants might not have had much say in government, but they were the muscle behind the Maya machine, growing crops, building cities, and forming the armies. The nobles, on the other hand, were like the original Instagram influencers, flaunting their wealth and power through elaborate ceremonies and rituals. So, what's the takeaway from all this political and societal intrigue? The Maya civilization was a tapestry of interwoven city-states, each vying for control and influence, yet connected through trade, religion, and shared culture. It was a world where a king's power was as much about divine favor as it was about military might, where calendars dictated life, and chocolate was more valuable than gold. As we continue to unravel the layers of Maya society, remember that this was a civilization built on both the brilliance of its achievements and the complexities of its politics. It's a reminder that behind the romantic allure of ancient stone cities lies a gritty reality of power struggles and economic savvy, a tale as old as civilization itself. Stay tuned for more as we continue to explore this fascinating world where the past is as vibrant and alive as the jungle that once surrounded it. Now, let's sink our teeth into the world of Maya cultural achievements, where stone and script were as much a testament to their prowess as they were a tool for flexing political muscle. Picture this, a jungle skyline dotted with stepped pyramids that rise like ancient ziggurats from the earth. These weren't just piles of limestone, they were monumental manifestations of power, designed to impress the gods and the neighbors alike. To the untrained eye, it might look like oversized jungle gyms, but these structures were about as complex as a modern skyscraper, minus the air conditioning and the Starbucks on the first floor. Take Tikal, for instance, a veritable metropolis of the Maya world. At its zenith around 750 AD, the city sprawled over 16 square kilometers and boasted architectural feats like the Temple of the Great Jaguar. Standing at a jaw-dropping 154 feet, this pyramid wasn't just a royal tomb, it was a political billboard. It screamed, "Look at me. I have the power, the resources, and the workforce to build this." Like a giant stone hashtag, it marked the ruler's territory and influence. And that's the thing about Maya architecture. It wasn't merely about utility. It was an elaborate game of show and tell, where the stakes were as high as the pyramids themselves. Now, let's debunk a common myth. The Maya weren't just mystical stargazers who built pyramids to align with the cosmos for some ethereal purpose. Sure, their astronomical observations were top-notch. Think NASA-level precision, with nothing more than naked-eye observations and a knack for pattern recognition. But these celestial alignments were also about timing ceremonies to awe the masses, reinforcing the ruler's claim to divine favor. It was like timing a fireworks display to coincide with a coronation, magical to witness, but deeply rooted in pragmatic showmanship. And speaking of showmanship, let's talk about the Maya writing system. Imagine a script so elaborate that it could give a modern cryptographer sleepless nights. The Maya developed one of the most sophisticated writing systems of the ancient world, with over 800 glyphs that could convey complex ideas and narratives. This wasn't just about recording history. It was a tool of propaganda. When a ruler commissioned a stela, a stone slab inscribed with glyphs, they weren't just documenting events. They were crafting a narrative, shaping how future generations would perceive their reign. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of curating an Instagram feed, where every post is meticulously crafted to highlight your best angles. But let's not get carried away with the romance of it all. The intricacy of their script also served a very practical purpose. It kept the knowledge in the hands of the elite. Literacy was a luxury, reserved for the nobles and scribes who could decode these complex symbols. It was a way of maintaining control, ensuring that the power of the written word, and by extension, the power to shape history, remained firmly in the hands of those at the top. And while we're on the topic of elite control, it's time to address the notion of the Maya as a purely peaceful society. Thanks to some overly romanticized interpretations, people often imagine the Maya as gentle philosophers pondering the cosmos. In reality, they were as much warriors as they were thinkers. Warfare was a constant undercurrent in Maya life, with battles fought not just for territory, but for captives, particularly high-ranking ones who could be ransomed or sacrificed to curry favor with the gods. It was a brutal world where power was as much about blood as it was about stone and script. Yet, amidst the bloodshed and political machinations, the Maya achieved remarkable feats. Their calendar system, for instance, was a triumph of mathematical genius, with their long count calendar allowing them to track time over millennia. This wasn't just about predicting eclipses or scheduling festivals. It was a way of imposing order on a chaotic universe. It was about demonstrating mastery over time itself, a concept that must have seemed as mystical to an outsider as it was logical to the Maya. As we journey deeper into the complexities of Maya society, it's clear that their achievements were a dazzling blend of art, science, and politics. They weren't just building cities and crafting scripts. They were constructing a civilization that was as much about perception as it was about reality. So next time you admire a Maya pyramid or ponder a glyph, remember that behind the stone and the script lies a story of power, ambition, and a little bit of showmanship. Proof that even in the ancient world, image was everything. And speaking of image, let's dive into the Maya's not-so-glamorous fall from grace, a decline as dramatic as any prime-time soap opera. 1 minute, you're the toast of the ancient world, and the next, you're scrambling to keep the lights on in your grand stone cities. So, what went wrong? Well, let's just say the Maya were up against a perfect storm of environmental, political, and social pressures that would make even the most seasoned spin doctor sweat bullets. First up in this historical drama is the climate, Mother Nature's own version of a reality check. Picture life in the Maya lowlands, where rainfall wasn't just a nice-to-have, it was the lifeblood of their agriculture-based economy. The Maya calendar was as much about tracking the rainy seasons as it was about scheduling festivals. But then, around the 9th century, the climate decided to flip the script. Droughts hit the region harder than a meteorite on a mission, with evidence from sediment cores showing significant dry spells between 820 and 870 AD. This wasn't just a little sprinkle drying up. It was a full-blown meteorological meltdown. In a world where corn was king and water was the crown, a prolonged dry season was like pulling the rug out from under their royal feet. The Maya had developed sophisticated water management systems, including reservoirs and canals, to store and distribute water. But when the skies refused to cooperate, these systems were as useful as a solar panel in a blackout. Crop failures led to food shortages, and suddenly, the lush jungle that once provided was as barren as a politician's promise. But nature wasn't the only one throwing shade. Let's not forget the socio-political unrest bubbling beneath the surface. The Maya city-states were like a high-stakes poker game, each ruler betting on power and prestige. But when resources became scarcer than a peaceful family Thanksgiving, those bets turned into outright brawls. Warfare became more common, with city-states like Tikal and Calakmul duking it out for supremacy. It was like the Wild West, but with more feathers and fewer six-shooters. And here's the kicker: deforestation. In their quest to build ever-grander monuments and fuel their lime production, the Maya chopped down trees like there was no tomorrow. Literally. The deforestation led to soil erosion, reducing agricultural productivity, and exacerbating the impacts of drought. Imagine trying to grow corn on a dirt road. Yeah, not happening. With every tree that fell, the environment tipped further out of balance, a reminder that even the mighty can't escape the consequences of their actions. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't they just adapt? Well, that's the tragic irony. The very systems that made the Maya so successful, complex political structures, intercity alliances, and intensive agriculture, also made them vulnerable. As the saying goes, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. City-states that relied heavily on their neighbors for trade found themselves isolated as alliances crumbled faster than a week-old tortilla. The elite's grip on power weakened, and when the social contract ruptured, so did the civilization. But let's not paint the Maya as hapless victims of fate. They were active participants in their own undoing. The rulers, focused on grand displays of power, might have overlooked the rumblings of discontent among the common folk. Archaeological evidence suggests that as resources dwindled, the gap between the elite and the peasants grew wider than a Yucatan cenote. It's a classic tale of the 1% versus the 99%, with the latter getting the short end of the obsidian stick. In the end, the decline of the Maya civilization wasn't due to a single catastrophic event, but a series of unfortunate circumstances that intertwined like the vines of the jungle. Environmental challenges, social upheaval, and political infighting created a pressure cooker that eventually blew the lid off their once thriving society. It's a sobering lesson in how even the most advanced civilizations are not immune to the whims of nature and the folly of man. As we stand among the ruins today, it's easy to romanticize the Maya as mystical astronomers and masterful builders. But their story is also a cautionary tale about the limits of power and the importance of sustainable living. It's a reminder that, in the grand scheme of history, every empire is just one drought, one war, or one bad decision away from decline. But don't despair just yet. The Maya civilization may have faltered, but their legacy endures, not only in the stones of their temples, but in the cultural memory of their descendants who still inhabit Central America. As we look forward to the final chapter of this saga, remember that history is as much about learning from the past as it is about preserving its stories for the future. So, stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll explore the enduring impact of the Maya and how their story continues to resonate today. As we turn our gaze toward the legacy of the Maya, let's take a moment to consider the irony of their enduring allure. Here's a civilization that quite literally vanished into the jungle, leaving behind an architectural ghost town that now draws travelers like moths to a flame. The Maya's stone cities, once bustling with trade, politics, and the occasional ritual sacrifice, now stand as silent sentinels to a bygone era. Today, tourists and archaeologists alike traverse the dense jungles of Central America to stand in awe of these ancient wonders, snapping selfies in front of pyramids that once echoed with the footsteps of kings. But what is it about the Maya that continues to captivate us? For starters, their cultural achievements were nothing short of extraordinary. The Maya calendar, which famously caused a modern-day panic in 2012, was a masterclass in celestial observation and mathematical precision. Their ability to track time with such accuracy, using only the naked eye and their wits, rivals some of today's advanced technologies. It's a testament to human ingenuity, reminding us that even without the internet or smart gadgets, ancient societies could unlock the secrets of the universe with little more than patience and a clear night sky. Yet, beyond the allure of their astronomical prowess, the Maya left us with lessons that resonate far beyond the stone walls of their temples. Their rise and fall offer a cautionary tale about the perils of environmental mismanagement and the fragility of human societies. The Maya thrived in a challenging environment by developing sustainable agricultural practices and advanced water management systems. But as the population grew and resources became strained, their ecological footprint expanded like a waistline after too many holiday feasts. Deforestation and soil degradation set off a chain reaction that ultimately contributed to their civilization's decline. Sound familiar? Fast forward a millennium, and humanity is still grappling with similar issues. Climate change, resource depletion, and environmental degradation are challenges that modern societies face with increasing urgency. The Maya story serves as a historical mirror, reflecting our own struggles with sustainability and reminding us that even the most advanced societies are not immune to the consequences of ecological hubris. If nothing else, their legacy implores us to heed the lessons of the past and to tread more lightly on the earth. Yet, let's not forget the cultural continuity of the Maya people, who are very much alive today. Descendants of this ancient civilization inhabit the regions of Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, keeping their traditions, languages, and customs alive. These modern Maya communities are a living testament to resilience and adaptation, proving that while civilizations may rise and fall, culture endures. Their languages, such as Quechua, Yucatec, and Quechua, are still spoken by millions, providing a direct link to their ancestors who once roamed the great cities of Tikal and Palenque. In the realm of popular culture, the Maya have been mythologized to the point where fact and fiction often blur. Movies and books revel in the drama of their rituals and the mystery of their disappearance, painting them as either mystical savants or tragic victims of fate. But the truth, as always, is more nuanced. The Maya were a people of remarkable complexity, capable of great achievements and grave mistakes, a reminder that history is no fairy tale, but a tapestry of triumphs and trials. Today, the ruins of the Maya stand not only as tourist attractions, but as symbols of human achievement and folly. They remind us that while we might build great monuments and chart the stars, we are still bound by the same earthly limitations that have challenged humanity for millennia. As we marvel at the intricacy of their art, the sophistication of their urban planning, and the depth of their astronomical knowledge, we are also invited to ponder our own place in the grand narrative of history. Are we merely repeating the cycles of the past, or can we learn from the Maya's story to forge a more sustainable future? In the end, the Maya's enduring legacy is one of both caution and inspiration. Their civilization may have receded into the jungle, but their influence echoes across time, inviting us to reflect on our shared human journey. So the next time you find yourself lost in thought among the ruins, remember that the stones beneath your feet are not just relics of a bygone era, but stepping stones into the future. Lessons carved in limestone, waiting for us to decipher their secrets and learn from their wisdom.